Chapter 21. Chapter text Chapter 21. Harry and Hermione weren't enjoying being at home in London for the summer as much this time. Unlike last year, Sirius and Hermione's parents had forbidden them from riding their bikes between the houses. Sirius had explained to the Grangers about Bellatrix Lestrange being on the loose, and that had seen the introduction of the rule that an adult was needed to drop them off, and if they went out, they needed a chaperone. Mostly it was Sirius dropping them off and picking them up because he could side along them much easier than one of the Grangers could drive them, especially when they stayed inside the city. Once when Harry was over at Hermione's house for the day, she told Harry that she thought that this was also probably her mother's idea. She explained how her mother had pulled her aside for a talk the first night they got back from school and said she approved of Hermione and Harry, but didn't want Hermione to risk pregnancy until she was finished with her schooling. Harry had laughed at that, which hurt Hermione's feelings a little until he explained. "Myoni, I love you, your quirks and all, but let's be honest here. If there is one girl that doesn't need to be told to finish school first, it's you. I don't think I ever met someone who put such a high priority on their schoolwork than you," Harry said as he pulled her into a hug he truly hadn't meant to hurt her. "You're more important, you idiot," Hermione admitted as she buried her head in his chest. Harry truly had no words to say to that, only pulling Hermione in tighter. The two spent most of the rest of that day just cuddled up on the sofa, causing Dan to call them sickly sweet when he got home from his shift in the Granger's dental practice. Harry spent a lot of time reading the Daily Prophet that summer looking for information on Lestrange, but the paper had a distinct lack of blood and death that Harry would have expected from the insane women. As the weeks went by, most witches and wizards seemed to think that the woman had left the country. Due to the fact that Voldemort had died specifically by the Dementor's kiss this time, something the wizarding community understood a lot better than him disappearing after trying to use a killing curse on a baby. This added up to the wizarding public starting to use the name Voldemort instead of the you-know-who nonsense. It was that more than anything that made Harry uncomfortable, because he had told them that Voldemort was beaten this time. Everyone was letting their guards down. Harry just hoped he could work out where the last Horcrux was before Voldemort was able to find a way back, or he would have very little resistance when he did come back. The third week of the holiday was the worst for Harry. The Grangers had gone to France for the week for a vacation, so he was left without Hermione for the longest time they had been apart in a while. It turned out Hermione had spoken with Sirius about the trouble Harry was having coming to terms with what he had fudged due to Pettigrew, Crouch, and Riddle. He found this out one day midweek when Sirius had cornered him in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. He sat Harry down and put a large glass of fire whiskey in front of him. "Do yourself a favor and drink that." Sirius indicated the drink. Harry just looked at Sirius, wondering what was going on. "Trust me, it will make the conversation we are about to have easier," Sirius insisted. Harry thought that his godfather was about to give him the talk and mentally agreed he would rather be tipsy for that conversation. He drank down the fiery spirit and winced as it burned its way down his throat. As he hadn't drunk any spirits since coming back in time and couldn't remember drinking any in the previous timeline either, his lack of drinking experience was obvious from his reaction. "You okay?" Sirius sounded concerned, but looked amused at Harry's suffering. "Why does anyone drink that?" Harry was genuinely concerned that all adults were crazy. While appreciation for it is definitely an acquired taste, mostly it's drunk for the effects rather than the flavor. Sirius admitted. Harry just ignored him and got himself a glass and filled it with water. "So what did you want to talk about?" he asked before taking a drink. "So what's all this crap about you being a monster?" Sirius asked, surprising Harry and causing him to choke. Sirius whipped his wand around, and the water in Harry's airway vanished, letting him breathe again. After a few breaths, Harry shot a look at his godfather. "I thought you were going to give me the talk. I don't want to talk about this." He tried to walk away, but with a flick of his wand, Sirius sealed the door and he couldn't open it. Harry considered his options. He could probably destroy the door with magic if he had his wand, but he would face trouble for breaking the statute of secrecy. He could just sit there in silence and see whose will broke first, his or Sirius. But he then remembered that in the previous timeline Sirius had moved into a cave and was living off of rats because he thought he would be a little bit of help to Harry that way. Harry could be stubborn as well, but he wasn't sure he could be that stubborn. In the end, he only had one real choice. He sat back at the table. Fine, what do you want to know? I want you to explain how you can think of yourself as a monster. The sadness in Sirius's voice was plain to hear. Harry refused to look at Sirius, instead choosing to stare at his half-empty glass of water. What else could I be? Victor was right. First, I was torturing the monsters in that maze by setting them on fire and leaving them to bleed out. Victor may have used the killing curse on them, but at least that was quick. I was killing them slowly and painfully, and I didn't even think about it. Then I was whisked away to that graveyard. Again, I didn't hesitate in killing Voldemort's snake. I just cut it open and let it bleed to death while I subdued Crouch Jr. When I took down Pettigrew, I wanted him to put up more of a fight so I could justify killing him. Then, when I took them all to Hogwarts, it was me who pushed the minister into giving them all the Dementor's kiss. No trial, no confirmation, they were guilty. I just decided and had their souls destroyed. I know what ignoring the right to a trial can do. Harry looked at Sirius for the first time as he said that, but only for a moment. The worst part, I don't even feel guilty about what I did to those people. I would do it all again twice as hard if I had to. So tell me, Sirius, how am I not a monster? How am I not something my parents would find disgusting to call their son? Harry only realized he was crying when he felt the teardrop fall from his nose. He felt an arm wrap around him and felt both better and worse. Better because he had thought Sirius would be disgusted in him for what he said and wouldn't want to be anywhere near him, but worse because Harry was still holding back the worst of what he had done. Harry, there is nothing you have done that your parents would be disappointed in you for. They fought in the blood war, sometimes on the front lines. Both your parents and I have blood on our hands. And while your mum and dad will be disappointed in others for you being in the situation where you had to do what you did, they would never be disappointed in you for what you did. Peter and Junior both have broken out of prison. All a trial would do is give them an opportunity to escape, and who knows what Voldemort would have done. Your decisions may not have been the lightest of options, but they were the best you could do in those circumstances. You are focusing on what you did to those three, but consider what would have happened if you hadn't. They would have restarted the blood war, and lots of other people, innocent people, would die instead. You would be a target. They might even make Hermione a priority target to get to you, and it's not like you killed anyone. Sirius paused as he felt Harry stiffen in his arms. It's okay, Harry. I'm on your side. Just tell me what happened. Harry didn't know if it was the alcohol or the soothing tone in Sirius's voice, but he finally answered, "Which time?" There was silence from Sirius for almost a minute, and Harry was sure that he could finally see what Harry saw in the mirror. "Why don't you tell me in order?" Harry just nodded and started speaking. First was Quirrell. It was in the Great Hall on Halloween my first year in Hogwarts. Everyone thinks it was just the result of some dark magic he was under, but he was possessed by what was left of Voldemort. I knew, and I knew what the result of touching him would be. I purposely went for the carotid artery, the one that takes the blood to the brain. He was still alive when he was taken out of the hall, and I don't know if it was Voldemort abandoning him or the wound I caused that killed him, but I definitely intended to kill him, he explained. How did you know he was possessed by Voldemort, and what spell did you use? Sirius asked carefully. I can't tell you how I knew, but I trust where it came from. Harry wasn't going to tell Sirius about traveling in time. For one, Sirius might tell others, but more importantly, Harry didn't want to tell the man that he had left him in Azkaban for over a year while knowing how to get him out. He may have done it for an important reason, but letting Sirius know would only hurt the man. And I didn't cast a spell. My mother did when she died trying to save my life. It left me with a protection against Voldemort, and it was that protection that reacted to Voldemort in Quirrell that hurt him. But I wielded that protection like a weapon and killed a man who was just laying on the floor. He didn't even put up a fight. Harry was clinging to Sirius's robes, hoping that the man wasn't about to leave, but Sirius just held on to Harry and prompted him to continue. I did the second one right in front of you. I was the one who killed Lucius Malfoy under my invisibility cloak. Hermione was the one to slow everyone's fall, but I was the one who killed the man in cold blood. Harry went silent when he finished. The silence dragged on for what felt like hours, though it was probably 10 minutes. During this time, Sirius held Harry close. Eventually, his godfather broke the silence. Were there any witnesses apart from Hermione? Harry answered. Under the invisibility cloak, so no. Well, except for Darby. Apparently Darby recognized my magical signature, but he works for me now. Sirius looked thoughtfully when Harry got the courage together to look up at the man's face. Good. A house elf can't betray their master, so there is no danger there. And Hermione wouldn't turn you in either. You do realize how monumentally stupid that was, right? Killing a well-connected pureblood who had that much influence in the ministry. If they ever find out, you'd be lucky if they throw you into Azkaban for the rest of your life. Sirius proceeded to give Harry a lecture on doing stupid shit that could get Harry thrown into prison. Lovingly, of course, but still sternly. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. The day before Hermione was due to come home, Harry was brooding in his room at Grimmauld Place. Sirius had convinced Harry that he didn't see Harry as a monster, but he was still having a hard time not seeing himself as one. Part of the problem was that he knew he was going to need to kill at least one, maybe two more people, Tom and Bellatrix, before this was over. And he didn't have a problem with this. The more introspective Harry got, he realized that he had reclassified those two in his head so that they weren't people anymore. They were just problems to deal with. How could he reclassify people into a non-person so easily? Harry was interrupted from his brooding when Sirius knocked on the door and came in. He looked around and crossed the room before sitting on the opposite side of the bead facing Harry. When Harry looked at his godfather, he spoke. I need to vent a little, Harry. I was just chatting with Remus, and he was moaning about work. That wasn't unusual, Harry thought. Sirius and Remus were on speaking terms again, which Harry considered a plus for Sirius if nothing else. Sirius continued. Apparently Minerva was chewing his ear off yesterday. Do you remember the Muggle-born girl who was the daughter of one of the campground owners at the World Cup? Sirius asked. The memory of the poor terrified girl being levitated in the air by a gang of make terrorists played in Harry's mind, and a sense of dread settled in his stomach. Yeah, I remember her. What's happened to her? Harry demanded. Sirius raised his hands placatingly. The girl is fine, as is her family. The problem is she doesn't have the money to attend Hogwarts. But isn't there a fund to help poorer families? Harry asked. Sirius looked a little pissed off as he started to explain. Yes, but it's not unlimited, and a number of fathers of pureblood kids went to Azkaban last summer, strangely enough not long after the World Cup. The people in charge of the fund have decided that the children of wizarding families get priority over Muggle-borns. Harry translated in his head. The blood bigots had decided to give the money to the children of the pieces of shit that attacked a defenseless little girl and her family instead of trying to help the girl. I'll pay for her, he suddenly declared. That took Sirius by surprise. What? I'll pay for her to attend Hogwarts, Harry said as though Sirius was a little slow. That's a lot of money, Harry. It's 1,000 galleons a year to attend Hogwarts, and once you make an offer like that official, you are bound for the whole 7 years. 7,000 galleons is a lot of money. Sirius was being very careful not to tell Harry what to do, but made sure he had all the facts to make the decision. Harry thought about it. While 7,000 galleons was a lot, almost £35,000, but it wouldn't put much of a dent in the gold in his vaults in Gringotts. I still want to do it, he decided. If it's what you want, then okay. But do me a favor. Sleep on it. Give yourself time to really think about it. In the meantime, I will go and speak with Professor McGonagall and inquire how this needs to be done. Despite what he said, Sirius looked proud as he spoke. Sirius flew to the 3 broomsticks in Hogsmeade and began to walk up the road outside the village to the school. He could have flew directly, but the weather was nice, and he wanted to walk. Besides, it would give him time to work out what he was going to say to Professor McGonagall. As he walked, he considered the conversation he had just had with his godson. It had gone exactly how he had predicted it would. Harry had jumped at the chance to help the little girl straight away. He smiled when thought about why he had done this. Despite Harry still thinking so little of himself, his first instinct was to help. This would be good for Harry's self-image. Monster, that's a load of hippogriff shit, Harry. Now I'm gonna make you prove it to yourself. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry was nervous. He and Hermione were currently waiting in the private function room of a small local pub not far from the campgrounds where they held the Word Cup. Normally, the room was rented out for functions like weddings or funerals, but as the room wasn't booked for anything today, the landlord had let them use it for free, but they would have to walk to the main bar if they wanted anything. It turned out giving people money for school was more complicated than Harry had expected. At first he thought he could just pay the school, but the school couldn't accept people just sending them money for a random student, and Harry couldn't give money to the hardship fund without losing control over how it was spent. In the end, Professor McGonagall had needed to go visit the Payne family and ask them if they wanted to meet with someone who was looking into offering their daughter a private scholarship. The family had, of course, agreed to talk to Harry, if nothing else. Hermione was busying herself, going over the paperwork that Sirius and Professor McGonagall had drawn up in anticipation of a successful meeting. She had been a little surprised when she got back to the UK that Harry had decided to fund the education of the young girl, but she quickly saw the same opportunity that Sirius had and was fully supportive of Harry's idea. Sirius walked in with Professor McGonagall and a vaguely familiar family of 3 The woman, who Harry took to be Mrs. Payne, was obviously pregnant. A little behind the rest came who Harry knew was Mr. Payne in a wheelchair. Harry felt a flood of guilt over that. It was his actions that had taken this man's ability to walk. However, despite what Harry was feeling, the family were all smiles. The girl had long, straight black hair that ended in the small of her back and tan skin that said she spent a lot of time outdoors. While she was dressed in a nice dress, the way she unconsciously fiddled with it made Harry think that it wasn't how she normally dressed, and that her mum had dressed her up to make a good impression on Harry. Mr. and Mrs. Payne looked at Harry and were obviously surprised. He wondered if they hadn't been told he was still a student or if it was something else, but he stood up and walked over to the family and introduced himself. Mr. and Mrs. Payne, I presume, and you must be Susan. Harry smiled and shook everyone's hand. I'm Harry Potter and this is my girlfriend Hermione Granger. Hermione is like Susan, a magical person born to non-magical parents. Hermione shook everyone's hand after Harry. We thought you might like to talk to someone who went through what Susan is facing. She smiled at the young girl. Harry invited them all to sit, and with a few flicks of her wand, Professor McGonagall had the tea set that she had brought animate and served them all a cup. The Paynes looked amazed, but Susan looked at the display of magic like she couldn't wait to try doing it herself. Professor McGonagall took charge of the meeting from there and turned to the Paynes first. Well, as you know, your daughter has a place at our school. However, your financial situation, while not dire, is not up to sending a child to a private boarding school. I told you about the fund Hogwarts has to help families in difficult financial situations, but due to some outside factors, that fund was stretched beyond its capacity this year. Mr. Potter here found out about this and has offered your daughter a private scholarship. Any questions? Mrs. Payne had a question. I need to ask. You look like you're still in school. Can you really afford this? Harry smiled sadly. As you can probably guess by my godfather being here rather than my parents, I'm an orphan. My parents were killed by the leader of the terrorists who were behind last year's incident. I was left with a rather sizable inheritance, and paying for Susan to attend Hogwarts won't cause any problems, Harry explained. I'm sorry to hear about your parents, Mrs. Payne said sincerely, but she relaxed with Harry's insistence that he could afford this. Susan asked a question next. Why would you pay for me to learn magic? Harry grinned widely. He had been hoping to get this question. Forgive the bad pun, but Hogwarts is simply magical. The Paynes laughed at his pun, but everyone else let Harry know how unfunny he was. Jokes aside, I have been at Hogwarts for 4 years now, and it's been an amazing experience. One I think shouldn't be denied to anyone who has magic. Magic is amazing, and it can be beautiful. I have seen unicorns, fairies, and winged horses. I am in a position to help you experience that, and so much more. Harry explained at least some of his motivation. Susan looked excited and ready to go to Hogwarts. Mr. Payne asked what exactly Harry was offering, so he slid 2 copies of the paperwork over to the 2 parents. The offer is quite simple. I will cover her tuition for all 7 years, and I can help with supplies if you need it. All Susan will have to do is maintain an average grade of E. which stands for exceeds expectations. The magical world's equivalent of a B. Hermione and myself will even help her keep her grades up for the next 3 years. The conversation went on for almost an hour while they covered everything from who would administer the scholarship, Professor McGonagall, to what was the food like at the school. In the end, the Paynes accepted Harry's offer for tuition, but refused his assistance with buying the school supplies at least for this year, but wanted to keep that option open for the future. Once they were done, Hermione gave a gift to Susan. In typical Hermione style, it was a book, a copy of Hogwarts, a history. The younger girl was happy to get the book and thanked Hermione, and they arranged to meet up in King's Cross on the 1st of September before saying their goodbyes. Once they arrived at Grimmauld Place, Harry and Hermione took over the library and tackled some of their summer homework. Harry was feeling better about himself than he had in a long time. Helping someone where he didn't need to risk his life or the lives of others, and where no wands needed to be drawn, was exactly what he needed. Now he just needed a plan for what he was going to do over the next year. Chapter 22. Chapter text, Chapter 22. The 1st of September brought with it the trip to Hogwarts, which would be the first time Harry had been out in wizarding public since he had gotten off the train before the start of summer break. Wanting to avoid a fuss, he had even gotten serious to go do the back-to-school shopping for Hermione and himself. Hermione had been disappointed to miss out on a trip to Flourish and Blotz, especially after her parents had given her £150 to convert to galleons after both she and Harry had been made the new Gryffindor prefects. However, she had completely understood what would happen if Harry stepped into the alley. Also, given the amount of times her photo and name had appeared in the media over the summer as the boy who lived's girlfriend, while they printed story after story about Harry catching Voldemort, she wasn't sure she could go to the alley without being harassed either. The Grangers had offered to take Harry to King's Cross, and when they arrived at King's Cross, they found little Susan Payne and her parents sitting in the small cafe, Susan drinking a Coke while her parents each enjoyed a cup of tea. Harry and Hermione asked Susan if she wanted help getting her trunk onto the train, and if she would like to get a compartment with them, which the young witch accepted. Hermione said her goodbyes and promised to write to her parents, and then the two teens and the little first year stepped through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, finding themselves once more on the magical platform. Parents and children were saying goodbye to their sons, daughters, and older siblings who were about to leave for school, and a number of first years were crying, already homesick and missing family they hadn't even parted from yet. Owls and toads added to the noise as they called to each other or demanded attention from their humans. Then, people started to notice that Harry Potter had arrived. It was almost as if a wave of silence washed over the crowd, soon dispelled and quickly replaced by energetic whispers of "It's Harry Potter." Susan, who knew nothing of Harry's past, got nervous at so many people staring at the group she was currently in, but before she could do or say anything, Hermione spotted how uncomfortable the young girl was. She put a reassuring hand on Susan's shoulder and told the girl, "It's okay. Harry is really famous among witches and wizards, and he won a big international sporting event at the end of our last school year. No one is going to hurt anyone." The little girl calmed for now, but Harry wasn't sure that would hold up to him being mauled by fans, so he leaned into Hermione and whispered, "Why don't you take the trunks and Susan and get us a compartment? I'll go play nice with the public." He tried not to say the second part like he was describing his own personal hell, but judging by the look Hermione shot at him, he didn't think he was successful. "Okay, but don't be long." She gave Harry a kiss on the cheek, and with a few flicks of her wand, the three trunks stacked themselves and started floating towards the train, while Hermione followed them, leading Susan. To give himself a reason to have separated from the girls, Harry grabbed the trolleys that they had their trunks on and pushed them to a trolley bay that was right next to the arch that led back to the Muggle station. When he turned back, just as he expected, more than a few of the parents had come over. The first one to get to him grabbed hold of Harry's hand and shook it. "It's such an honor to meet you, Mr. Potter. I have been reading about what you did all summer, and it's just astonishing. To think he was alive and hiding all this time. But you took care of that, didn't you?" Harry shook hand after hand, and while he didn't like it, he definitely wasn't as overwhelmed as he had been the first time this had happened to him. He did realize he was justified in getting serious to pick up his school things, though. One thing Harry noticed was that while the parents were all fighting to shake his hand, the students who went to Hogwarts with Harry just looked embarrassed by what their families were doing. It made some sense to them. He was just a student who did something crazy. No matter how much the prophet made him out to be some amazing hero, they still had their memories of the last few years where Harry was pretty quiet and focused rather than someone who wanted to be in the spotlight. Eventually, Harry saw that he only had 10 minutes until the train left and had to leave, so he called over everyone. "Okay, I'm sorry, everyone, but I need to get on the train. Can't go missing school now, can I?" Reluctantly, the crowd parted and let him through. Luckily for Harry, they were all parents, and the idea of a kid missing their ride to school was anathema to most of them. It took Harry about 5 minutes to find the compartment that Hermione had found. It wasn't just Hermione and Susan, though Luna was sitting with them reading the latest copy of the Quibbler. "Good morning, Harry." Luna didn't even look up from her magazine. "Hey, Luna, anything interesting?" he asked, indicating the magazine. However, Luna answered the question more broadly. "Everything is interesting if you look deeply enough, Harry. Well, everything except Professor Binns's class, but that's just him, not the subject." Harry and Hermione both laughed at that, but Susan looked confused, so Harry filled her in. "Professor Binns is the most boring teacher you will ever meet. He is a ghost who teaches history, but despite how cool that sounds, he has an almost perfect record of making students fall asleep. In fact, Hermione here is the only student I know who has never fallen asleep in his class." The trip to the castle was fairly uneventful. There was a meeting where the new head boy and girl addressed the prefects, telling them about the schedule to patrol the train and to give them the time and place for the first prefect meeting of the year. However, there was no Malfoy to come and try to wind up Harry in the hope to get a reaction while he and Hermione patrolled the train. So the only problems were the usual stuff you get when a large group of teenagers has little supervision. The highlight was introducing Susan to chocolate frogs and Birdie Bart's every flavor beans. Of course, Harry had to teach the first-year muggle born the ever-popular game of every flavor roulette. That he was able to pull Hermione and Luna into the game was a double win, except Luna never seemed to get a bad flavor. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, the feast went great. For the second year in a row, the defense against the dark arts professor was the same as the year previous. It seemed that Professor Lupin was going to be their defense professor permanently now. Susan was sorted into Hufflepuff. Susan Bones was one of the new Hufflepuff prefects, so Harry knew she would look after the new first years in her house. He and Hermione had to lead the new first years up to the common room, and as they led the first years through the castle, Hermione kept pointing out places where interesting things happened according to Hogwarts, a history. Harry, not to be outdone, decided to do the same, but much to Hermione's continued disappointment, he still hadn't read Hogwarts, a history. So, instead of pointing out places of historical interest, he pointed out places where some of the best pranks Fred and George had ever played happened, with a full description of the chaos that resulted. Harry didn't want to brag, but the first years definitely seemed to prefer his tales of chaos to Hermione's histories. The biggest stress, outside of homework, the next week was taking the Gryffindor firsties down to breakfast every morning, and the only reason that was stressful was because he was running out of prank stories to tell. Unfortunately, the piece couldn't last. The Monday morning paper proved just how fragile that once was. The front page had a photo of Bellatrix Lestrange firing a dark mark into the air while she stood in front of a burning building that looked like a normal muggle home. Under it was the headline, "Insane Death, Ida Begins Reign of Terror." The article went on to say that Lestrange had killed a muggle-born wizard and his muggle wife, and had also left a message in the house that indicated that more such attacks were coming. Harry let out a growl of frustration. He had hoped he would have a lot longer before any more of this madness would raise its head. Hermione asked him what was wrong, so he handed her the paper. It only took seconds for her to see what had gotten him so riled up. "Fuck, I didn't expect her to move this openly." Hermione surprised a lot of the people sitting around her by her use of profanity, but Harry knew that Hermione just saved the harsher language for when she thought it was truly necessary. Well, subtlety and planning were never the demented bitch's strong points. A part of me wonders how she ever made it into Slytherin. Harry tried to focus his mind on anything but the images that the newspaper had painted in his head. Probably pure ambition and blood fanaticism, Hermione pondered. The two of them and a number of other students, especially Neville, picked at the rest of their breakfast before going to class. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry was only a little surprised when during his first lesson, Charms, Luna knocked on the door and handed a note to Professor Flitwick. After reading the note, the fun and excitable half-goblin teacher addressed him and Hermione. Miss Granger, Mr. Potter, the headmaster has requested your presence in his office. Pack up your things and go with Miss Lovegood here. Oh, and be ready to demonstrate to me the muggle-repelling charm at the start of our next lesson. Harry and Hermione packed up and followed Luna out of the charms class. Any idea why the headmaster wants to talk to us, Luna? Hermione asked, even if they could both probably guess it was to discuss Lestrange. Luna nodded. He wants to discuss a new supplier of milk for the school. He's considering changing the dairy we currently use to one called Cadbury. Harry tried not to laugh but wasn't very successful. Hermione did a lot better but still smirked at their friend. Luna, Cadbury is a muggle company that makes chocolate. It's not a dairy. Luna frowned. I think the headmaster will be disappointed. He specifically mentioned Cadbury's dairy milk, and it looked like he thought it was delicious. This time Hermione couldn't keep a straight face, so it was left to Harry to explain. Luna, Cadbury's dairy milk, is the name of the Cadbury Company's signature chocolate bar. The headmaster likes to use the name of Sweets as the password to get into his office. I think that he was telling you the password so you could tell us. Oh, then I'm afraid I can't answer your question. I have no idea what the headmaster wants to talk to you about. The smaller girl sounded really disappointed that she didn't have an answer for them. They arrived at the gargoyle that guarded the headmaster's office, and the password was indeed Cadbury's dairy milk. The headmaster was waiting for them and called them in before they could even knock on the door. As soon as they stepped inside, he spoke up. Ah, Miss Granger, Mr. Potter, please sit down. It was obvious that the man was a little agitated despite the smooth and even tone of his voice. I trust the two of you have seen this morning's edition of the Prophet. He paused for a second, and both Harry and Hermione nodded. Tell me, what did you notice about the photograph? That it was weird they had one, Harry said, after only a moment. Lestrange doesn't seem the type to let someone take her picture without killing them when they point a camera at her. Ah, the photo was taken using a highly modified pensive. I believe that the Prophet has the only one with that capability in all of Britain. The memory is from a bystander that Lestrange missed. That's not what I was referring to. There was a copy of the paper on the headmaster's desk, and Hermione opened up the paper and looked at the photo again. This time she ignored the obvious and paid attention to the details. Was there something specific about the house, or Lestrange's wand? Was she standing on something? All of those seemed unimportant as she checked them out. Maybe it was something in her outfit. That's when Hermione saw, tied to a loop on Lestrange's belt, a goblet. Harry, is that what I think it is? She pointed out the cup in the photo. Harry just looked at the photo for a full second before he said anything. I think it is. That could be Hufflepuff's cup. What do you think, Professor? Dumbledore looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses before saying, I, like you, Harry, think that that is indeed the legendary cup of Helga Hufflepuff. Then the last Horcrux is in the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange. Fuck! Harry shouted the expletive. While I can understand the sentiment, Harry, I must ask that you refrain from using such language in my office. This is still a school after all. Dumbledore said in the way that made everyone think of him as a kindly grandfather. Harry didn't apologize, though. Instead, he pressed forward. Sir, you don't understand. Horcruxes can possess people. If Lestrange has the cup, who are we facing? Lestrange, Voldemort, some combination of the two. Now Dumbledore looked surprised, and Hermione looked like she was going to be sick. Please, Harry, I know you don't trust me, but I need to know everything you know about Horcruxes and hopefully how you learned it. The old professor sounded more weary than Harry ever remembered him, and Harry looked to Hermione for her opinion. She thought for a bit before saying, the timeline is completely different now. We don't need to worry about people changing it anymore. Not since the end of last year. You stopped Voldemort from returning that night, so we are flying blind again. So Harry told Dumbledore almost everything. Quirrell and the Philosopher's Stone, Ginny and the Diary Horcrux, Sirius, Peter and the Dementors, the original Triwizard Tournament and its outcome, Cornelius Fudge not believing that Voldemort had returned and sending Dolores Umbridge to the school where she tortured students, the war, Dumbledore's death, searching for the Horcruxes, the Muggle-born camps. The only real thing he left out was how he and Hermione had come back in time. When Harry finished recounting the previous timeline, Dumbledore looked shocked. I can see why you don't trust me. The other me had plans and kept secrets, and it led to such horrible things. I thought such camps were a mistake humanity wouldn't make again. I saw such camps. It was soul-destroying. Yet my actions, however inadvertently and indirectly, led to British witches and wizards repeating that mistake. Silence hung in the air after the headmaster spoke, and it was clear that Dumbledore was using the silence to think about all the information Harry had given him. They were there for so long that one of the castle's house elves popped in and gave them each a bowl of soup and a sandwich, indicating that it must be lunchtime for the rest of the school. Harry, just how complete was the possession of Miss Weasley? Was it just control like the Imperious Curse, or was it deeper than that? Dumbledore asked as he dipped the corner of his sandwich in his bowl of soup. It was deeper. The Horcrux was feeding off her, but it was also using her to control the basilisk. The basilisk recognized her as the heir of Slytherin. She could even speak Parseltongue. Harry froze after he had said that last line. Harry! Hermione turned to look at him, concerned why he had stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence, only to find Harry had a stunned look on his face. He dropped his sandwich, not out of any conscious decision, but because he simply forgot to keep hold of it. He then raised his hand to the scar that was on his forehead over his right eye, a look of mixed realization, fear, and rage on his face. God fucking damn it. Chapter 23. Chapter text, Chapter 23. The Horcrux was feeding off her, but it was also using her to control the basilisk. The basilisk recognized her as the heir of Slytherin. She could even speak Parseltongue. Harry froze after he had said that last line. Harry! Hermione turned to look at him, concerned why he had stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence, only to find Harry had a stunned look on his face. He dropped his sandwich, not out of any conscious decision, but because he simply forgot to keep hold of it. He then raised his hand to the scar that was on his forehead over his right eye, a look of mixed realization, fear, and rage on his face. God fucking damn it. Harry, what's wrong? Hermione sounded afraid, not of Harry, but at whatever was coming that had gotten this reaction out of her. Harry. Tell me, Professor, how long have you known? Harry's voice was cold. Known what, Harry? Hermione asked, clearly worried. I'm a Horcrux. That's why I can speak to snakes, and that's why I have visions of what Voldemort is seeing, and he has known about it for years. Harry pointed at Dumbledore when he said that last sentence. And just when should I have told you? When do you tell someone that they harbor a fraction of one of the darkest souls currently walking the earth? Dumbledore stared at his food, refusing to look up. How about when you found out we threw out the laws of time to fight this war? Hermione snapped. Or when we gave you the location of the ring Horcrux with a way to destroy it? You can't hide behind the idea that we weren't ready, not after what we have done. Now tell the truth. Why didn't you tell us? Harry felt his heart warm a little that Hermione was still using words like us. If he feared one thing from this, it was that Hermione, his foundation, his port in a storm, would distance herself from the disgusting thing he was now they knew the truth. Dumbledore looked up at them, and Harry saw just how old the man had become. He was tired of the wars, of the loss of life. And give the opportunity for the shard to affect you even more. You're dark enough already. What? Both Harry and Hermione shouted at the same time. But Hermione continued. How can you possibly think Harry is going dark? How can I not? First year the soul shard was protecting you from my legilimency probes. Then on Halloween you killed poor Quirinus without a shred of remorse. Second year you befriend a basilisk, one of the darkest creatures ever created, which was first made by the same individual who invented Horcruxes. You manipulated the Minister of Magic like a master to get your godfather out of prison. At the Quidditch World Cup, you killed Lucius Malfoy and permanently injured a number of people, including Miss Payne's father. Then, when you got back to school, you stripped Mr. Malfoy of his magic, and once again manipulated Cornelius into doing what you wanted, getting him to order the destruction of 3 souls. Given all that, how could you possibly think you still stand in the light? Harry just stared at the headmaster, unbelieving. Hermione, on the other hand, replied with a rather loud, "What a load of cherry-picked bullshit. Talk about the worst possible interpretation of events. Okay, Dumbledore, I'll answer every single one of your charges, and when I'm done you can answer mine. How dare Dumbledore call him dark after everything he had been through? Let's see, your first charge was that the Horcrux was protecting me from your legilimency probe. That's nothing but a misdirection. I was acting. Why? Because my occlumency is not very good. I can tell when someone tries to probe me, but I'm not good at stopping them. So I had a plan to keep illegal mind-reading headmasters from learning that Hermione and I had traveled back in time. Absolutely nothing to do with dark magic. Your second charge, killing Quirrell. Let's not forget that the man was involved with trying to restore Voldemort to a full body, and all the while he was killing unicorns to keep his body from falling apart. The man was already dead and didn't know it. All keeping him alive would have done was torture him, sacrifice a few unicorns, and risk the Philosopher's Stone, as luck is a factor. Let's not forget that the only reason Voldemort was in a school full of kids was because you decided to move the stone here rather than putting it in a random location protected by a Fidelius charm. In fact, the only reason I can see for you to bring the stone here is that you wanted to see how Voldemort and I would react to one another. Dumbledore once again refused to look at Harry, and Harry knew he had hit the nail on the head with that accusation. Hermione gave the headmaster a hard look at the idea he had personally endangered the school. Now, my manipulation of the Minister of Magic to get my godfather out of prison. Let's not forget who exactly the chief warlock was who never got my innocent godfather a trial. I was serving both the law and the good, and no one got hurt. Next, you claim I killed Lucius Malfoy. What made you come to that conclusion? Harry got up and started pacing back and forth behind his and Hermione's chairs. Dumbledore picked up his spoon and absent-mindedly stirred his soup as he spoke. I investigated once you took it upon yourself to pay for her education. It was obvious you felt guilty about something. You were at the campground, no one saw who cast the curse, and I know about the invisibility cloak. A few memories from people who were there, timing from when the 2 of you vanished. It wouldn't hold up in the Wisengamot, but it was enough for me to know. Well, fine. I killed him and injured the other Death Eaters. Harry admitted. I was aiming to injure, not kill, but these things happen in combat. I would have preferred him to go to prison like the others. Don't you see, Harry, that when you killed him, you removed any chance to save his soul? Dumbledore looked disappointed. Harry started to wonder if the man was senile. Save his soul. He didn't want to be saved. He had his second chance at the end of the war, and what did he do with it? He taught his son to be a blood bigot and encouraged him to bring the war to a new generation. Then he was the one who gave Voldemort's Horcrux to an innocent 11-year-old girl so that she would order the basilisk to kill students. If allowed to live or go free, the man would kill people, a lot of them. Did I mean to kill him? Number, am I sorry I killed him? Again, no. You can't save a person who refuses to see what they are doing is wrong. Am I sorry Mr. Payne was hurt? Yes, and I will do what I can for him and his family. A full-ride scholarship for any magical children they have seems like a good start. And your last accusation is basically feeding 3 men to the Dementors. Let's start with Pettigrew and Crouch Jr. Tell me, sir, what is the penalty by treaty with the Dementors for someone who unlawfully escapes Azkaban? Is it not already the Dementors' kiss? Them I only hastened a sentence that they were already guaranteed and prevented anyone from trying to break them out of holding while they waited for a trial. As for Voldemort, do you think anything short of the kiss could have done anything to him? What else should I have done? Let him get a body back and throw Wizarding Britain back into another civil war? Well, I've already seen that, and I refuse to see it again. Harry took his seat. I noticed you left out your friendship with the basilisk. Dumbledore didn't sound smug, but the words grated nevertheless. It's just a magical animal, no different than a dragon. Powerful and dangerous though it may be, it's no more evil than a dragon is. Just because some people who can control them have them do evil things doesn't make that evil part of their nature. Can you imagine what would happen if those same types of people could control dragons? The basilisk is more than happy to stay where she is and leave the students alone. If my visits keep her that way, I don't understand the problem. You admonish me for bringing the stone to the school but see no problem with the basilisk. Dumbledore sounded disbelieving. Then give me somewhere else to take her. I'm sure we could move her in the summer holidays when there are no students. You seek to save a monster that has killed people but condemn people who kill. Do you not hear yourself? Dumbledore sounded a little desperate. The difference is choice. The basilisk was never given one, just following orders she was given in Parseltongue. Those people all had a choice after the war ended, and they chose to keep on killing people. They made their choices, and if I have to be, I will be the consequences. Harry got up out of his chair and left the headmaster's office. Hermione got up to follow Hardy, but just before she left, she turned to the old man. I noticed you didn't answer for your deeds. From where I stand, you are far darker than Harry. Harry doesn't manipulate it so that innocent people are the ones who suffer and die. Here's a question for you to think on. Just how much has Auror and Healer recruitment fallen since you had to start constantly telling people that Professor Snape has your complete trust? Also, you can have a ready-made spy for a war that Harry has already prevented from happening. Have a good day, Professor. With that, she left the room to go help Harry, who had just realized that he has a portion of his parents' murderer stuck in his forehead. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Hermione eventually found Harry brooding in the astronomy tower staring at the Quidditch pitch. We should break up, Harry said sadly when Hermione moved to stand next to him. Fuck that. Hermione's response was immediate and adamant. But Harry tried to speak, but Hermione cut him off. No buts, Harry. I love you. I don't care what you're facing. From now on, you'll face it with me standing by your side. We have dealt with most of Voldemort already, and if we have to deal with the part in your head as well, then that's what we'll do, Hermione stated firmly. We both know the only way to destroy a Horcrux is to destroy whatever is holding it. I need to die, Harry said sadly, but resolutely. Hermione suddenly realized that was why Harry had come to the astronomy tower. He was thinking of throwing himself off it, not because he was depressed, but because he thought that this was the only way to keep everyone else safe. She forced herself not to panic and answered him calmly. Seems a little drastic, Harry. For one, we don't actually know if a Horcrux can't be removed, and secondly, you're not really a Horcrux. Harry looked at her disbelievingly. Hermione, there has to be a piece of him in me. It's the only thing that makes sense. Oh, don't misunderstand. There is probably a soul fragment there, though we should probably test that before doing anything drastic. No, what I mean is creating a full stable Horcrux needs an entire set of rituals that are complicated and takes a full day to perform. One of the first rituals is preparing the container to accommodate the soul fragment. I doubt that his soul fragment is as tightly bound to you as the other fragments are to their containers. Plus, the one in you is safely contained. The only problems it has ever given you are from its connection to the others. If we can destroy the one in the cup, or is it in Lestrange now? Not that that matters right now, but if that last shard is destroyed, then there is nothing your little hitchhiker can do but just sit there and watch you lead a happy life. What if it takes me over like the diary did Ginny? Harry asked, but Hermione could see his resolve melting. If, and it's a big if it comes to that, I will stop you myself, said Hermione with conviction. They both knew what wasn't being said. Stopping Harry at that point would mean killing him. Doing that would destroy Hermione, but neither doubted that she would do it. Not for the witches and wizards out there, but she would do it for him. She wouldn't let him suffer watching out of his own eyes as Voldemort used his body to restart his reign of terror. Harry was reminded of what Hermione had done to her parents in the previous timeline to keep them safe. That had almost broken her, and killing him would definitely break her, but that wouldn't stop her if he needed her to do it. Hermione, Harry didn't know what to say, so he just pulled her into him, wrapped her up in his arms, and kissed her. The two stayed like that for over an hour before they returned to the rest of the castle, only now realizing that they had now missed 3/4 of their potions lesson. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, Bellatrix Lestrange continued to attack randomly over the next 2 months, but Harry nor anyone else he talked to could make any sense of it. Despite the first attack targeting a Muggle-born and his wife, She wasn't attacking homes with Muggle-born witches or wizards. There seemed to be no pattern to the attacks. Muggle-born, purebloods, half-bloods, progressives, and traditionalists. There wasn't even a geographical pattern. Twice Harry had seen a student being taken aside by their head of house, only to learn later that day they had been orphaned by an attack. Of course, reading the news and trying to predict where the next attack was going to be wasn't all Harry and Hermione were doing. After everyone had calmed down from meeting with the headmaster, Hermione had gone to speak with the man about the Horcrux books. She wanted access to them so she could try and work out how to remove the soul shard from Harry. Dumbledore had not been in favor of the idea. He thought that it was a waste of time. Hermione couldn't tell if Dumbledore thought that it was impossible, so hadn't even tried himself, or if he just believed that Hermione couldn't work out a solution when the great Dumbledore had failed to find a solution. In the end, Hermione convinced him, but Dumbledore insisted that the books and Hermione's notes never leave his office, and Hermione had to take an unbreakable vow to only use the knowledge she gained to destroy Horcruxes, and that she would extract a similar oath from anyone she shared the information with in the future. It rubbed her the wrong way that Dumbledore didn't trust her, but as the magic she was researching was so repugnant, she agreed to the vow. Harry spent his time cashing in on his fame a little to get a meeting with the Minister of Magic. As much as Harry hated flu travel, he had to admit, as he picked himself up off the floor of the Minister for Magic's office, that it was quick. Even if you included the time Harry spent putting himself back together after the trip, Scotland to London's inner city in less than 3 minutes was fast. "Mr. Potter, good to see you," said Minister Fudge from behind his desk. "Please have a seat." He indicated one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Can I offer you a drink? Perhaps a cup of tea?" It was clear that the minister only remembered that Harry was still underage at the last moment. The pink-toed Umbridge was seated in a chair to the side of the minister's rather overly large desk. Harry had hoped that this meeting would be just him and the minister, but there was nothing he could reasonably say to get rid of the disgusting sack of hatred that had disguised itself as a human. Instead, he did his best to ignore her and nodded to the minister as he sat down. "Afternoon, Minister, and thank you for the offer, but I'm fine, thank you." "Well, Mr. Potter, what can I do for you? I must admit to finding your letter requesting this meeting rather mysterious." The older man smiled, trying to pull off the appearance of an approachable adult, but it was clear that the man had little to no experience with teenagers and was treating Harry as younger than he appeared to be. "Well, Minister, I was hoping to discuss the case of Bellatrix Lestrange," Harry said confidently. The minister's demeanor changed immediately. He sat up a little straighter and looked a little more confident in himself, apparently more comfortable with topics like this than anything he thought a teenager would have been looking to speak with him about. "Harry, you must understand I can't divulge information about an active investigation, not even to someone as respected as yourself." Harry gave the man a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Minister. I'm not looking for you to tell me anything, but rather I have an idea what the escaped convict may be planning." "Oh, then please tell me what you know." "No is too strong a word, but I think the logic is sound. To cut to the chase, I think you need to beef up security at Azkaban," the pink toad interrupted Harry. "Are you saying that the Ministry is not living up to its responsibilities?" Her voice had the forced sweetness that he remembered and loathed. "Well, that has to be the worst possible interpretation of what I actually said." Harry didn't even look at her as he spoke. He turned back to the minister. "Cornelius, let's see if you agree with my thoughts on this, and then you can decide if there needs to be more done to protect Azkaban or not." Harry tried to come across as a confident adult, and as he was actually 22, he was doing a fairly good job of it. Cornelius nodded for Harry to continue. "Okay, so the first thing I was trying to work out was what Lestrange's motivation is. If I could figure out her motivation, then maybe we can predict where she will be and we can lay a trap and hopefully put this unpleasantness behind us. Now, Minister, would you agree with me that Lestrange is a fanatic, a true believer in not only Voldemort, the two jumped at the name, but also the message he spread? So her long-term goal will probably involve restarting the war. At least that's what I think. Do you agree?" Fudge looked contemplative for a while, then looked a little worried. Harry understood why. He was most definitely a peacetime minister, and no one would trust him to fight a war. I'm afraid I can see her trying that. Not that I think she will be successful. Not many in the country would be willing to follow her. After the riot at the Quidditch World Cup, a lot of people who are more agreeable to the traditionalist message are in Azkaban. Harry smiled, as the minister had made half of his point for him. Exactly, minister, so you can see then where the problem is. The people who Lestrange needs are all gathered in a prison that she knows how to break out of. If anyone knows how to plan a prison break, it's Lestrange. And with her in charge of that group, I think any hope of avoiding another war will be little more than a dream, Harry explained. So you want me to beef up security at Azkaban? I wish I could say to you that you're worrying over nothing and to go back to school and let us worry about Lestrange. But your worries make too much sense. Fudge went and poured himself a glass of brandy. After warring with himself for a moment, he offered to pour Harry one and looked a little relieved when Harry turned it down. They spent another hour talking about what could be done and came up with a few plans to improve security on the island prison. Umbridge was a naysayer the whole time. Harry had to promise to declare who he was voting for as the head of House Potter in the next election for the minister, as he would be of age at the time, because Umbridge kept saying that Fudge would lose the vote of the traditionalists if he enacted one plan or the other. However, when Harry left, he was confident that Fudge would do something. Letter 3DF, Letter 3DF, Letter 3DF, Halloween, despite how nervous Harry had been, passed without incident. He had expected something, but the worst that happened was that Snape gave them a rather disgusting potion to brew in class. It was particularly nasty, because you needed to add the slime of a flobberworm when it was fresh, meaning they had to extract the slime by hand while brewing the potion. So, Harry went down to breakfast the next morning in a rather good mood. It was the start of the Quidditch season, and he would be playing against Hufflepuff in a few days. Harry had missed Quidditch last year, and the match against the Hufflepuffs was always a fun one. The Puffs played hard, but fair. Feeling hungry today, Harry loaded his plate with beans, sausage, hash browns, and some fried eggs. He was about halfway through his breakfast when his morning copy of the Daily Prophet was delivered, ruining the rest of his appetite. Underneath, the headline of Lestrange Strikes Again was a picture of a burning house, the dark mark clearly visible flying over the roof. It was number 4, Privet Drive. Chapter 24. Chapter text, Chapter 24. Harry was currently sitting in the reception area of the administration building of Smelting's Academy, waiting for the receptionist to come back from talking with the headmaster of the school. Are you sure that you want to do this, Mr. Potter? The authorities will take care of it in a few days if you don't feel up to it, Professor McGonagall asked as she sat next to Harry, her regular witch's robes transfigured into an old-fashioned tartan skirt suit. Harry pulled at the blazer that Hermione had transfigured for him from his school robes, though she had left the school crest on the blazer. He deserves to know now. It would be cruel not to tell him, he replied. He really didn't want to be the one to tell Dudley that Petunia and Vernon had been killed, but Dudley wasn't his parents. He may not have been very good at it, but he had changed after the Dementor attack, proving that he could grow. Harry felt like he needed to at least try with his cousin. The receptionist came back and sat back at his desk, but didn't tell Harry and Professor McGonagall that they could go into the office and see the headmaster for another 10 minutes. Harry knew what the man was doing. Vernon had bragged about doing the same thing in his business often enough. Making them wait tells them that your time is more important than theirs. It was a simple power play that only works if the person waiting doesn't know exactly what you are doing. When the two magicals were finally shown into the opulent office full of rich dark woods and padded chairs, they were bidden to sit by the immaculately dressed man who looked like he was in his late 50s. Almost as soon as they had sat down, the headmaster of the school started on what must have been a well-rehearsed speech. Well, Mr. Potter, Miss McGonagall, my assistant said you wanted to talk about one of our students. Now, I don't know what one of our boys has been accused of, but I assure you Harry raised his hand to stop the man from taking. Mr. Creedy, as interesting as it is that your go-to response to someone coming to speak to you about a student is to defend them against whatever accusation is to be leveled at them, I am not here to accuse one of your students of anything. Then can I ask why you are here? Of course, I need to speak with my cousin Dudley Dursley. The headmaster cut Harry off. We don't generally allow our students to have unscheduled family visits. Professor McGonagall, who was getting a little annoyed by the man in front of her, cut in. The matter Mr. Potter is here to discuss with Mr. Dursley is one of a particularly exceptional circumstance, and one of enough pressing importance to justify a bending of the rules. Only someone who knew the professor would recognize the presence of the Scots brogue in her accent for the indication of the strain of her patience that it was. Overly irritated by this meeting not going as he had predicted, Mr. Creedy demanded, "And what information could be of such importance?" Harry looked the man straight in the eye. "The death of my aunt and uncle, who are Dudley's parents." The demeanor of the headmaster changed immediately, going from irritable to cooperative in seconds. After checking something on his computer, he made a phone call and had Dudley come straight to the headmaster's office. Dudley waddled in, looking nervous, but when he saw Harry, his expression changed to one of confusion. "What are you doing here? Mr. Dursley, you might want to sit down. Your cousin has some news for you," Mr. Creedy directed his student. Once Dudley took one of the seats, Professor McGonagall turned to Mr. Creedy and said, "I think you and I should give these two some privacy for this conversation." Harry saw that the professor had subtly drawn her wand and cast a mild compulsion on the man. "While we do so, I would rather enjoy a cup of tea." Apparently, Dudley had seen the magic as well, because as soon as the professor and the headmaster of Smeltings were out of the room, he said, "She is one of your lot." She did that on Mr. Creedy, his accusation making the word "that" sound like something disgusting. Harry felt no need to lie, so he told his cousin the truth. "Yes, she is one of my teachers and my head of house. They wouldn't let me leave the school without an adult. The magic was to make your headmaster think that leaving the two of us to talk was a good idea, so we can talk openly." Dudley seemed to consider that for a few seconds before he asked, "That means you need to talk to me about that stuff. Why would you need to do that?" Harry hesitated. They were now at the main reason he was here, but now the time had come he didn't want to do it. This news would break Dudley, and despite what had happened to Harry growing up, he didn't want to be the one to do that. "Dudley, I don't know how to say this, but Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon, your parents, they're dead." Harry watched as emotions flickered across Dudley's face. First confusion as he placed together Harry's words, followed immediately by understanding, then disbelief, and finally devastation. Harry had seen Dudley cry hundreds of times, as it was one of his favorite tricks to get what he wanted from his mother. Now, however, despite the real pain that Harry's news brought, Dudley didn't shed a single tear. Showing an intelligence that Harry never would have attributed to his cousin, Dudley followed the logic and asked the question Harry dreaded. "How did you know about it before me? The cops wouldn't have been able to contact you at school." Dudley wasn't shouting or raging, but Harry could hear the edge to his voice. "They were killed by a magical," Harry admitted. "The police still don't know. The magical police are dealing with it before setting the scene for the normal police. They said they were going to make it look like a gasler." He never got to finish as Dudley's fist connected with Harry's jaw. "Just leave. You and the freaks like you are toxic. Leave. Get out." Dudley now had a face that was flooded with tears. Harry rubbed at his jaw before he nodded. "Okay, I'll go." He took out an envelope and placed it on the headmaster's desk in front of Dudley. "If you ever need to contact me, there's an address in there. The people there will know how to reach me if you ever need help." Harry made his way to the door, but just before opening it, he said what might be the last thing he would ever say to his cousin. "I will make sure the one who did this will pay." Then he opened the door and stepped out. As soon as he closed the door, Harry heard Dudley break down as only someone who had just been orphaned can. Harry went and found his professor, who was indeed having a cup of tea with the headmaster, and indicated he was ready to leave. He told Mr. Creedy what state Dudley was in and gave the man an envelope as well. "The people mentioned they will know how to contact me if needed. As my uncle is dead, if you need money to cover Dudley's tuition, get in touch. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry, what happened to your face?" Hermione demanded when he got back to the castle. "Dudley got a little emotional," Harry explained as he sat down next to her in the great hall just in time for lunch. Hermione started to make her thoughts on Harry's cousin clear, but he stopped her. "Hermione, of every time Dudley ever hit me, this time I feel I actually deserved it. Lestrange went there looking for information on me. If it wasn't for me, Dudley probably wouldn't be an orphan right now. Harry, you can't go blaming yourself, she admonished him. Oh, I don't. I know exactly who is responsible. But I left there when I knew it was me living there that protected them. It was Lestrange and Voldemort who need to answer for it, but I could have prevented it. A solid thump is something I deserved, Harry explained. Hermione frowned before pulling him into a hug. We'll go see Madame Pomfrey right after lunch. It was a statement, not a request, which caused Harry to smile. December came, and with it came snow. Lestrange's attacks had slowed down as people started to ward their homes better and take more precautions. Hogsmeade was still its usual festive self in the run-up to Christmas. As dangerous as Lestrange was, the prevailing belief was that she would stay clear of Hogsmeade and Diagon Alley, if for no other reason than because she would be so severely outnumbered. The Ministry had put a 50,000 galleon reward for information that leads to the capture of Lestrange, though everyone seemed to know that the Ministry was going to honor the reward even if Lestrange was brought in dead. Harry and Hermione were, a bit unusually for them, having a date, or they were at least combining a date with their Christmas shopping. After the Straldron carriages had dropped the couple at the edge of the village, the two walked in together, Harry with his arm around Hermione's shoulder as she leaned into his side and wrapped her arm around his back. Walking like that was a little awkward, but neither of them wanted to change a thing. Their first stop was Madame Puddifoot's tea shop. Just like Harry's last time in the shop, it was decorated for a holiday, though Harry had to admit to himself that he found the Christmas Yule decorations far less offensive than the Valentine's decorations he had seen previously. As both had already eaten breakfast in the Great Hall before coming, they only ordered drinks. Having come straight to the tea shop, they were given a small couple's booth with a comfortable two-seater bench that allowed them to sit close together, rather than on opposite sides of the table. They both ordered hot chocolate, though Hermione ordered one with peppermint flavoring while Harry ordered one with orange. When Madame Puddifoot came back with their drinks, there was also a side plate with a pile of pink and white fluffy marshmallows, and both teens immediately dropped a few in the mugs of hot, rich chocolatey goodness. Does your family have any plans this Christmas, or are you just staying home? Harry asked, remembering that in the previous timeline the Grangers had planned to go skiing. We are staying home this year. We are hoping to have a couple of guests over for Christmas Day, though. Hermione snuggled into Harry's side more. Oh, who? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Oh, just a couple of guys we know, Hermione said with a subtle emphasis, making it sound like she was saying more than she was, but Harry obviously hadn't gotten what she was hinting at, and Hermione smiled to herself. Anyone I know? Harry asked. Hermione giggled for a bit and debated with herself about teasing Harry more, but she decided against it. It's you and Sirius, you prat. We're inviting you both over for the day. A wide smile took over Harry's face. We'd love to come. Harry accepted for himself and his godfather. Well, you should probably talk to Sirius about it before I confirm with my parents. Harry agreed with Hermione's point, though he was sure that Sirius would jump at the idea of spending Christmas Day at the Grangers. Christmas with just the two of them was nice, but it wasn't what the holiday was supposed to be about. Christmas was supposed to be spent with your loved ones, and Hermione definitely counted as that. Harry put his arm around Hermione and pulled her in closer, and the two turned to smile at each other. However, Hermione's smile turned mischievous, and before Harry could work out what she was planning, she leaned forward and licked a dollop of melted marshmallow off his nose that he hadn't noticed. Delicious, Hermione said as she settled back into cuddling into his side. After they were done in the tea shop, the two set off looking for Christmas presents for their family and friends. Hermione's parents were both fascinated by magic, so shopping for them in Hogsmeade was not only doable but a good idea. They did split up for a bit to shop for each other's present, but it was less than an hour later that they met up again in the Three Broomsticks, a warm butterbeer exactly what they needed to recover from going shop to shop in the snow. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. It wasn't until Harry got home for Christmas that he was able to find out what was happening with Dudley. He found a telephone box near Grimmauld Place, and after looking up her dog breeding business in the Yellow Pages, called Aunt Marge. The conversation that followed had been hard. Not just because he was talking to the sister of a man who had died because of his connection with Harry, but because Marge Dursley was a vindictive bitch who had decided that if this was going to be the last time she ever spoke to Harry, then she was going to tell him exactly what she thought of him. It took 10 minutes of Harry listening to Marge say what a waste of air and burden he was before she told him that she had taken in Dudley, though she was gracious enough to offer to let Harry share Ripper's kennel until he could arrange for social services to pick him up. Apparently, her brother hadn't told her that he had moved out over 4 years ago. Harry and Hermione were in Hermione's bedroom, relaxing after the huge Christmas dinner that the Grangers had cooked, while Sirius, Dan, and Emma were all dozing in front of the TV. The three adults were all slightly drunk from the case of wine Sirius had brought as an offering for the feast. Harry and Hermione had only been allowed 1 glass of wine each with dinner, and so they were feeling a lot more awake than the adults. The two of them were lying on Hermione's bed, cuddled up together, enjoying just being hormone-riddled teenagers. At first, Harry had been reluctant, but as Hermione had put in a firm line that they were going to remain fully clothed, then the reluctance, born mostly from the idea that Hermione's parents could walk in at any moment, quickly faded. When Harry started kissing Hermione, she rolled onto her back and pulled Harry along with her so that he was on top looking down at her as he pressed his lips into hers. Their hands roamed over their sensitive spots, and the two lost themselves for a few hours. Happy anniversary, Hermione. Happy anniversary, Harry. What Harry and Hermione didn't notice was Hermione's door opening a crack and Emma looking into the room to see what they were up to. Once she saw that the two teenagers had opted to keep their clothes on, she let the worried mum side of her relax and snuck back down the stairs. "They okay?" Dan asked as Emma walked back into the living room. "They are keeping their clothes on." Emma smiled as she sat in her favorite armchair. Dan didn't look too happy at the news, but when he went to get up, Emma stopped him. "Dan, don't. They're not doing anything any of us didn't do at that age. In fact, if you just recall the story you told me of your time as a teenager, those two could do a lot more, and all you shouting about it will do is make you a hypocrite. Oh, and your daughter mad at you. If it's any consolation, considering how magic affects relationships, if they have been together this long, Harry is probably your future son-in-law," Sirius said from his spot on the sofa, a cup of coffee in his hand. "What do you mean? Is my daughter being controlled?" Dan was quickly on edge, the wine still in his system making him a little less calm than normal. "Oh God, no. But when magical people get together, if they are incompatible, then their magic makes them uncomfortable. Such relationships burn out quickly. If your partner is a good match, you feel drawn together. It's not any kind of control, it's more like a magical dimension to attraction. After all, you wouldn't say your daughter is being drugged by the chemicals, chamcols, her own brain makes." "Chemicals," both Grangers said at the same time. "Right, chemicals. But the point is, considering they have officially been dating a year now, there is a good chance that unless something drives them apart, then they will stay together." Sirius finished explaining. "That's interesting and everything, and I'm happy my daughter will be happy, but what about what they are hiding from us? Have you had any luck finding out what it is?" Emma pulled them back to a recurring topic that they had been talking about for a while now. "No, and it has me worried. I explained to you what Harry did at the end of the Triwizard tournament when he helped have 3 people fed to Dementors. But I realized something then. Harry was upset by that, true, but nowhere near as messed up as he should have been," said Sirius before he drank some of his coffee. "What do you mean?" asked Dan. "Harry helped destroy the souls of 3 people, yet a few weeks of moping, and he was fine once Hermione spoke to him. And I didn't realize this at the time, but Harry cast a Patronus. At 5T, blank looks from the Grangers, Sirius explained. A Patronus is an extremely advanced spell not taught in Hogwarts, and it has only one real use, warding off Dementors. But here's my question. Why did Harry learn to cast a Patronus? Why did he think that would be a spell that was worth the time and effort to learn? You almost sound like you think he planned it, Dan asked disbelievingly. Harry. No, I don't think so. I think they both planned it. Whatever is going on, I think they are in on it together. Or at least Hermione knows and agrees. I don't get the feeling that Harry keeps anything from her, and I'm sure if Hermione disagreed, then Harry wouldn't have done it. But wouldn't that mean Harry knew he was going to be kidnapped and just let it happen? Emma sounded like she didn't believe it. That's the only conclusion I can come up with as well. But that's not all. Harry has an emergency kit prepared. He has a wizarding tent, bigger on the inside, with the one he has basically with a London flat inside it. I found it the other day when he came over here for the day so he and Hermione could work on their homework. I went snooping through Harry's trunk to find what he was up to, and he has the tent fully stocked, ready to go. There's about a month's worth of food in there for a family, Sirius said, feeling drained the more he spoke. You don't think they are planning to run off together, do you? Dan asked. Emma answered first. No, Dan. Enough food to last a family a month sounds more like making preparations for all five of us to disappear to me. I'd call him paranoid, but it's not paranoia when they are really out to get you, finished Sirius. There was silence for 5 minutes with only the occasional bang or bump from the teenagers upstairs to break it up. So, what do we do now? Asked Sirius. I mean, you are the two with parenting experience. Move to Canada and enroll them in whatever magical school there is there, Dan suggested, only half joking. Oh, not Canada. It's too cold there. How about Australia? Emma joked. But seriously, do we need to do anything drastic? As much as it pains me to say this, but haven't they pretty much already dealt with it? Yes, you have that one criminal on the loose at the moment, Sirius cut, in my cousin Bellatrix Lestrange, knee black. Emma nodded. Yes, her. But isn't she pretty much all that's left of the group that's after Harry? As much as moving to another country might satisfy our need to feel like we did something, what would we actually accomplish? That calmed everyone down a little. I still wish that they would talk to us, Sirius said dejectedly. All we can do is be there for them until they are ready to open up, Emma told him, and Dan nodded in agreement. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, on the train ride back to Hogwarts. Susan found them and sat with them for an hour. She told the two teenagers, who had become a sort of cross between tutors and older siblings to her, about her Christmas, going into detail about every one of her family's reactions to her stories about Hogwarts, before returning to her Hufflepuff year mates. Both Harry and Hermione were glad that Susan fit in so well in Hufflepuff. They had worried that word would get out that Harry was the one who was paying for her tuition, and that would make the other students nervous about approaching her. However, as far as Harry knew, the fact that he had stepped up when the Hogwarts Hardship Fund failed hadn't come out, and Susan had been able to make real friends who wouldn't abandon her if, but more likely when, the truth got out. Chapter 25. Chapter text, Chapter 25. The new year in the school started with every teacher giving another lecture on just how close their OWL exams were now. Hermione piled on the pressure when she handed Harry a study schedule and told him she expected him to pass every subject this time around with at least 5 outstandings. As this was Harry's second time through, he needed to improve on what he got last time. When Harry asked if that meant that Hermione was looking to get straight outstandings this time, she just smiled and told him, "Why not? That's what I was aiming for last time." Harry realized that Hermione had a point. They may have been focused on dealing with Voldemort, but the fact that they had a second chance with their OWLS and a head start on their NEWTS was a chance that they should grab with both hands, as their results here would stay with them long after they had finished dealing with Voldemort. Luckily, Hermione's schedule had plenty of free time in it for Harry to play Quidditch, and Hermione had the time they spent helping Susan doubled up as their revision of the first-year material. That had apparently been Professor McGonagall's input when Hermione had spoken to her. According to her, one of the best ways to improve your understanding of the basics is try to teach them to others, as you find yourself re-examining and understanding the topics with the experience you have gained since then. Hermione had considered trying to set up study groups to help second and third years as well, but Harry had talked her out of it. It was one thing to help Susan and a couple of her friends, but they didn't want to overcommit to anything, especially when they still had the cup and the scar in Harry's head to deal with. They had theorized that it would be okay to leave the soul fragment in his scar once they had dealt with the last Horcrux, but that didn't mean that they weren't still looking into how to remove it. Hermione's theory that the soul fragment was less bound to Harry than it would be in a true Horcrux had proven to be true when Hermione broke down the arithmancy behind the rituals. But still, the only known ritual to remove a soul fragment from a Horcrux was for the person who had made it to reabsorb the fragment into themselves. However, the main potion of Voldemort's soul had been turned into a Dementor snack, and they didn't even know if the fragment in the cup could merge with the fragment in Harry's head, even if it wanted to and could be trusted to do so. Needless to say, that solution was completely off the table, with nearly every Death Eater who Voldemort and Lestrange could trust in Azkaban after the World Cup. The terror that the two could cause was severely limited. Places like Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley, Azkaban, and the Ministry were all too well defended for one body to attack on their own, and despite the craziness of both Lestrange and Riddle still had a sharp mind and avoided those places. They continued to attack homes, but most places had wards that took at least 10 minutes for even someone as powerful as Lestrange and Voldemort combined to break in. Also, the Auras had gotten skilled at getting to a property quickly. They hadn't gotten close to catching the possessed bitch yet, but the rate of deaths from Lestrange had dropped sharply. They also finally found out why Lestrange and Voldemort were targeting random people. It turned out that a message had been sent to both the Ministry and the Daily Prophet demanding the release of the marked Death Eaters, and that the killings would continue until they were released. The Ministry had put a gag order on the Prophet, preventing them from printing the ultimatum, and the Prophet had, of course, challenged the ruling in the Wisengamot, citing freedom of the press. The Wisengamot had upheld the gag order on the Prophet, declaring they didn't want the public demanding the release of Death Eaters who would undoubtedly make everything worse. What didn't make sense, however, was that the same Wisengamot members who had decided to uphold the gag order then went and gossiped about it to their families, who told their friends, and so on. In Wizarding Britain, which only had a population of about 100,000 witches, wizards, squibs, etc., that rumor spread extremely quickly until the gag order fell apart and the Ministry was forced to release a statement. It turned out the Ministry's fears that people would call for the release of the Death Eaters were misplaced. While some were in fact calling for the release of the Death Eaters, mostly people who were already supporters of pureblood supremacy, after an opinion piece that was penned by Rita Skeeter came out, the much bigger call was for the Ministry to respond by executing Death Eaters in response. That the Ministry couldn't do that by law actually helped Fudge stay in office, as after people started calling for the executions, he went on record saying he wished he could, but the law prevented him from doing so. Combined with the fact that Fudge had executed the 3 who were caught at the end of the Triwizard tournament, meant that the public believed him and began to see Fudge as someone fighting for them who was constrained by the law. The politician that Fudge was, he drank in the adulation and loved every second of it, but to maintain that image that was doing so much for him politically, Fudge actually started putting out policies that helped that image. One big thing Harry approved of was extra funding to the DMLE for them to increase their aura recruitment. Harry and Hermione were walking around the school together after curfew when all students had to at least be back in their common rooms. Well, almost all the stuff, the metal badges that gleamed on the chests of each of their robes, granting them the right to be out later than most of the other students. A pity it was only so that they could find those other students who were out after curfew and send them back to their common rooms. Harry pulled out the Marauders map, and after a quick look around to check that he and Hermione were the only ones in the corridor, he tapped the map with his wand and uttered the phrase to activate it. You know, my dad is probably rolling in his grave that you convinced me to use a Marauder's tool to help stop rule breaking. Harry grinned at his girlfriend. Hermione grinned back up at him. And what do you think your mum's doing? Probably laughing her ass off, if Remus's stories are to be believed, Harry admitted. But the map was made by my dad. It seems more like a dad thing. Well, the sooner we clear our part of the castle of any students, the more time we will have for other things, Hermione teased Harry, reminding him of the deal she had made with him. Harry opened up the map and took a look at who was in their section of the castle. Apart from them, there were 8 people. One they could ignore. It was Professor McGonagall going from her office towards her rooms near Gryffindor Tower as she turned in for the night. There were 3 pairs of people and one person who was sneaking around on their own. The nearest was a couple in a broom cupboard, and this one was going to be kind of awkward, considering who it was. Harry let Hermione take the lead on this one as he pulled open the door, revealing Ginny Weasley and Dean Thomas, both busy trying to inspect the other's tonsils with their tongues. The fact that Ginny's bra was on the floor and Dean's hand was inside her robes only made it more awkward for Harry given the history he remembered with Ginny, though he was happy that he only felt awkwardness and none of the jealousy that he feared he would feel. "Okay, you two, break it up," Hermione told the two who were suddenly trying to right their clothes and mussed up hair. "Hurry up and get back to the common room, and Harry and I will forget we saw anything." Just as the two were leaving, Harry remembered two of the other people he had seen on the map and called after them. "I suggest that if anyone asks, you two say that Dean was helping Ginny with practicing her transfiguration and lost track of time." Hermione looked at Harry questioningly, and he whispered, "The girl has 3 older brothers in the school, 2 of which are Fred and George. Do you want to be the one to try and deal with the fallout if they get protective?" Hermione admitted that that was a fair point before they made for their next couple. Technically, the ones closest to them were Fred and George, but the 2 prefects decided to skip them for now and give Ginny and Dean time to be back in the common room before sending the twins their way. The next couple were in for some teasing from Harry, as he felt a lot less awkward about them. He opened the door to an old unused office and smiled when he saw 2 fourth-years snogging, though this time only one was a Gryffindor. Harry saw the camera that was set aside on the old writing desk and grinned to himself as he put a finger to his lips, indicating to Hermione to be quiet. He picked up the camera and silently disillusioned himself before he stepped into the room moving around Luna Lovegood and Carlin Creevey until he had a good angle. Harry was glad that Luna and Carlin, while enjoying each other's company, were not as handsy as Ginny and Dean, so he thought the photo he was about to take with Carlin's camera would be a cute memory and nothing inappropriate. The flash went off, startling Carlin, but Luna only smiled and said, "Hello, Harry," while looking directly at him, despite the fact that Harry was disillusioned. Harry dropped the disillusionment and watched Carlin relax as he saw who it was that had caught him and Luna. He held out the camera to Carlin, and the boy took it. "So Luna, you and Carlinham, how long has this been going on?" Harry was smiling, non-verbally telling them that he approved even if he had to stop them at the moment. "Oh, Carlin and I first danced together the night after the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, after I pushed you and Hermione to dance together," Luna stated matter-of-factly. "I had to put it in your head that Hermione was a good person to dance with before they announced the Yule Ball, after all. And Carlin here is cute, so I decided to claim him for myself." Harry was a little surprised by what Luna said, and he tried to remember the party that Gryffindor had thrown after the first task. He remembered Luna drawing him and Hermione onto the dance floor and then disappearing, leaving him dancing with Hermione. Had that affected his decision to ask Hermione to be his date to the Yule Ball? Probably, he mused. He wondered if he would have even gotten together with Hermione without Luna's little push, and decided that he would give her the benefit of the doubt. "Luna, you are by far the best wingman ever." He leaned in and gave the girl a quick side hug, not unlike the ones he had seen the Weasley twins give Ginny on occasion. "Now the 2 of you need to get back to your common rooms before Hermione and I are forced to actually do something." The 2 smiled and gave each other a quick peck before scurrying off to their own common rooms. "So Luna pushed us towards each other then?" Hermione asked. "Looks like it," Harry admitted, curious where Hermione would go with this. "Remind me that I really need to do something to thank her then," Hermione said, before she gave him a quick chaste kiss that wouldn't have been inappropriate to any professor except perhaps Snape, before they went off in search of their next victim. They ran into Fred and George as they were on their way to find the lone person who was skulking around, so they had to deal with them first. However, Harry still had the Marauders map out, and the twins recognized it. "Hey, how did you get your hands on our map?" the first twin demanded. "Yeah, it was stolen from us a few years ago," the second twin jumped in when the first took a breath. "And we would like it back now, if you please." Back to the first twin. They both held out their hands as if they expected Harry to hand over the map just like that. However, he just blanked the map and put it in his pocket. The twins looked mutinous at Harry's actions, but he spoke before they said or did anything. "As the son of Prongs and the heir of Padfoot, I have more of a claim to the map than anyone." His tone, while not unfriendly, left no misunderstanding that he could be moved on this topic. He liked the twins and got on well with them, but the map was one of the only things Harry had of his father, and he wasn't going to give it up if he had a choice. "You're the son of Prongs. So you're the one who stole the map." Twin one started off again, sounding shocked. Prongs was James Potter. Twin two asked, just as surprised as his twin. "Who were the others? Do you know? You must know who Padfoot is if you are his heir." Harry rubbed at his head while Hermione answered them, the ping-pong speech giving him a headache. "Yes, James Potter was Prongs before he died. Padfoot is Harry's godfather, Sirius Black. Moony is Professor Lupin, and Wormtail is Peter Pettigrew, the man who betrayed the Potters to Voldemort." Both of the twins got disgusted when Hermione mentioned Pettigrew, as it was their family that was tricked into hiding the criminal for over a decade. In the end, the twins agreed that the map was Harry's by right, but they took heart in finding out that their defense professor was one of their heroes, so it was a much hopeful pair of twins who made their way back to the common room. Harry and Hermione examined the corridor that Fred and George had come from, looking for whatever prank the Weasley twins had been setting up, but they couldn't find anything, so they both made a mental note to avoid the place for a few days. The last person on their round was Pansy Parkinson. They approached her cautiously. They had learned that two students together usually meant hormonal teens letting off some of their frustrations. A person on their own, though, was usually up to no good. They found Parkinson sitting on her own in an unused classroom crying. A part of Harry wanted to just say he didn't care and send the girl to her common room and report her to her head of house, but something stopped him. Before he could decide what to do, Hermione made the decision for him and asked the girl if everything was okay. It turned out that her father was one of the Death Eaters who was arrested at the World Cup, and with the losses that the blood purists outside Hogwarts had suffered, it had an effect in the Slytherin common room. Now there was a large group who were calling for the executions of the captured Death Eaters. One of the more vocal, who apparently grew up near one of the families Bellatrix had targeted, had cornered Pansy in the middle of their common room and had gone on a tirade against her father, saying the world would be better off if the man was dead. Add to that the loss of Draco, and she was feeling rather vulnerable. Hermione helped the girl for a few minutes before sending her back to her common room. When Harry asked Hermione why she was nice to Parkinson when the girl had always looked down on her, his girlfriend just said, "Sometimes all a girl needs is a little kindness when she's crying to change her whole life, and even Parkinson deserves that opportunity." Once they had dealt with Parkinson, Harry checked the map again and found that there were no more students anywhere near the parts of the castle they were set to patrol. Grinning, Harry showed Hermione and then picked her up bridal style and ducked into an unused classroom. A quick flick of his wand had the desk clear of any dust, and he sat a giggling Hermione on the desk. "And just what are you planning, Harry?" Hermione's tone was more teasing than questioning. "Well, I was thinking I might just act like a massive hypocrite," Harry told her, the smile on his face mirroring hers. He leant forward and pressed his lips to hers, and Hermione kissed him back eagerly, her arms encircling him, pulling him in tightly and increasing the pressure on their lips. She started to suck on Harry's lip in a way that drove him wild, and soon Harry's tongue was probing the inside of Hermione's mouth. Hermione sucked at him, her tongue caressing his and silently encouraging Harry to go further. Harry felt Hermione start to unbutton his robes a little, and her hands slid in, and under the jumper he was wearing to ward off the chill, caressing his chest as she moaned in pleasure as she felt up the thin, wiry muscles. He mirrored Hermione, and his own hands made quick work of buttons of her robes. Harry was surprised to find that Hermione wasn't wearing any top under her robes at all, apart from a Gryffindor scarlet bra that looked frilly and absolutely gorgeous on her. The bra had a clasp in the front, and Harry fumbled with it for a few seconds before Hermione withdrew one of her hand from his chest and popped open the clasp herself, then grabbed Harry's hand and placed it on her boob so that Harry was palming her hard nipple before she snaked her hand back inside his jumper. Harry absolutely loved seeing Hermione like this when she wasn't worried about homework, exams, or wars, when they could just relax and let down all her barriers and just exist in the pleasure of the moment. The two soon lost themselves for the rest of the evening, only stumbling back into the Gryffindor common room just before the prefect's curfew. It was early February when they got the next bit of information on Bellatrix/Voldemort. Unfortunately, it came as a Daily Prophet headline. Bellatrix Lestrange attacks sister. At first, Harry and Hermione were worried that Andromeda and her husband Ted Tonks had been attacked. After all, Ted was a Muggle-born, and that was just the kind of target the Death Eaters liked, second only to Muggle civilians with no way to fight back. However, the article revealed that Bellatrix Lestrange, nee Black, had attacked her other sister, Narcissa Malfoy, nee Black. Narcissa had survived, as had Draco, who wasn't in the house at the time, but Narcissa was recovering in St. Mungo's, and Malfoy Manor now had a bunch of new holes in it. Why would Lestrange or Voldemort want to attack Narcissa? Harry asked once they had left breakfast and found a private classroom where they could talk. Maybe she, whatever, maybe it needs money. The Malfoys were always big funders, Hermione suggested. No, I don't think so. Narcissa would have just given them the money. She wasn't exactly unwilling to help Voldemort in the past, and her sister would probably have an easier time convincing her to part with gold. Plus, I think the Lestrange vaults weren't hurting for gold either, and you know the goblins are like Switzerland. They stay neutral and will bank with anyone. Harry was more thinking out loud than answering Hermione. Then why would Lestrange or Voldemort go to the Malfoys? What do they have that they could want? Maybe they just wanted sanctuary. A warm bed and a hot meal would be inviting if they haven't had it for a while. No, Narcissa would have even less of a problem providing that than gold. Harry was pacing back and forth as he thought it through. No, the Malfoys must have had something Narcissa refused to give up. Harry suddenly stopped moving. Or couldn't give them, because she didn't have it anymore. He was looking for the diary Horcrux. Harry half shouted as he realized just what Voldemort was looking for. Wait, if he is looking for his soul fragments, then he's going to go to all the places that they were hidden. His mother's house, the cave, Malfoy Manor. He has the cup, his snake is dead, and the last one was here. Well, the castle will probably be the last place he looks. He's afraid of Dumbledore and quite probably me as well. Fuck, the locket in the cave. What about it? It's a fake. We don't need to worry about it. Hermione was confused by Harry's sudden intensity. But it still has the note from Regulus in it. That note will send Voldemort straight to Grimmauld Place. Straight to Sirius. We need to get there now. Chapter 26. Chapter text, Chapter 26. Harry and Hermione rushed through the castle as they made their way to the headmaster's office. 3 different teachers shouted at them to stop running and took points, but neither of them paid any attention as they rushed past. As they ran up to the gargoyle, Harry shouted the password at it so that it had already gotten out of the way before the 2 teens got there, and they barely slowed down enough to not crash as they started up the spiral stairs. Harry didn't bother knocking on the headmaster's door either, just threw open the doors with a swish of his wand. Dumbledore was sitting behind his desk and started to ask what was going on, but Hermione just summoned the headmaster's supply of flue powder and threw that handful into the fire. The flames instantly turned green, and the 2 teens ran into the fire, calling out 12 Grimmauld Place. A few moments later, the 2 teens came tumbling out of the fire in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. Sirius was sitting at the table eating his breakfast. He turned and saw the half-panicked teens with their wands out looking for danger. What's happened? Harry heard his godfather's question and relaxed a little. If Sirius was asking, then nothing had happened yet. He was about to answer when there was a sudden flash of red fire in the corner of the room. Harry turned towards it and was just able to prevent himself from firing off a spell when he saw Dumbledore standing there, Fawkes in one hand and his wand in the other, obviously ready for a fight. What's happening? Dumbledore demanded, ready to join a fight. Harry had to admit, while he and Hermione may have problems with Dumbledore, it couldn't be denied that the headmaster wanted to stop Voldemort. That was one thing they could trust he would do. Harry put his wand away, causing the 2 adults to relax a little, but he still went to the front of the house and looked out of the windows to check the street before he said anything. Bellatrix and Voldemort are trying to collect the Horcruxes. She will come here looking for the locket. Harry had been talking to Dumbledore, but he hadn't minded if Sirius overheard. He didn't, however, expect what Sirius said next. Are you telling me that there is a Horcrux? a fragment of Voldemort's soul in my house. He sounded extremely pissed off. Sirius, my boy, you know what a Horcrux is? Dumbledore asked, as surprised as Harry and Hermione that Sirius would know of such magic. Sirius replied with a hint at anger in his voice at his question going unanswered. Every male in the Black family is warned about those abominations and promises to destroy any of them that he finds. A dark lord about 600 years ago made one, and he almost wiped out the entire family before we could permanently stop him. Now tell me where this locket is so we can destroy it. It's already been destroyed, Master. Creature popped into the room with the broken locket in his hands. Young Master Harry was giving Creature what he needed to fulfill Master Regulus' last order and destroy the nasty locket. The little elf held out the locket to Sirius. Sirius took the locket and examined it, and Harry could see the tension leaving his godfather's body as the man sat down in a comfortable armchair. Tell me, Harry, how do you know about Horcruxes? There wasn't any anger in the question, but it was somehow more demanding because it was basically an order. And not an order from his teacher or headmaster, not from an aura or the ministry. This was an order from the man who had accepted the job of Harry's dad. Dumbledore tried to distract them, but when it became clear that Harry wanted to tell Sirius and that Hermione supported him, Dumbledore took a seat so that he could listen. Fawkes perched himself on the back of the chair that Dumbledore sat in and looked like he wanted to listen as well. It made no difference to Harry, as Dumbledore already knew about their time travel. Harry and Hermione told their whole story year by year. The first year with a professor posed by Voldemort who tried to kill Harry 3 times. Second year with the basilisk and being blamed by the whole school. Third year, where Sirius broke out of Azkaban to save Harry from Pettigrew and almost being eaten by a Dementor. Fourth year, the Triwizard Tournament and a Polyjuiced Barty Crouch pretending to be Mad-Eye Moody while he used unforgivable curses on students, and of course the return of Voldemort. Fifth year, and the shadow war between the Order of the Phoenix and the Death Eaters, along with the inference at Hogwarts by the Ministry, ending with the fight at the Ministry where Sirius was killed by Lestrange, but Voldemort was outed as being alive again, and the prophecy. Sixth year, and the open war with the Death Eaters, how Dumbledore had told Harry about Voldemort's Horcruxes, and how Malfoy had let a band of Death Eaters into the school, leading to Snape's cold-blooded murder of Dumbledore. Lastly, seventh year with the fall of the Ministry, the Muggle-born Registration Act, and the Snatchers. Muggleborn just disappearing and never being heard from again, the Horcrux hunt, how they lost at Christmas in Godric's Hollow to the snake, and finally going back in time to Harry's 11th birthday. Harry specifically left out how they had travelled, but Fawkes gave a trill, and Dumbledore put it together. I assume by this point you know that the feather in your wand, Harry, was one that was donated by Fawkes here. As Fawkes is my familiar, I asked Garrick to tell me when the wands were sold, just an idle curiosity at the time when I asked. And as Hagrid was there, he told me about Miss Granger suddenly appearing in a ball of fire when the wand bonded to you, Harry. I take it that this was when you two came back in time. Seeing no point in denying it at this point, both of them nodded. Interesting. Ollivander thought that you, Miss Granger, had just been teleported to the wand, as the last one to try the wand before Harry. It's a well-known power of the Phoenix that they can apparate through fire. It's why Phoenix ash is one of the key ingredients in making Floo powder. But did you know that some Muggle thinkers are starting to believe that time and space are in fact just two sides of the same coin? It's not inconceivable, then, that the ability to travel through space could be used to travel in time as well. But if that were the case, I would have expected your 17-year-old bodies to be the ones that came out in this timeline. However, it was only your consciousness, your souls. That's interesting. But what does that all mean, Professor? Sirius asked Dumbledore. That we still have a lot to learn about time, space, magic, and of course phoenixes. Dumbledore reached up behind him and gave Fawkes a scratch under his chin. Deciding to get the topic rolling again, Harry continued. Well, once Hermione and I were back, we started making plans to deal with all the problems that we knew were coming. We couldn't do much, though, because despite having been through so much, we were both only 11 again. So we focused on trying to find the Horcrux at Hogwarts. I will admit it took us an embarrassingly long time to work out where it was. We couldn't do much that first year, because we knew that the diary would be sent to Hogwarts the next year, and we didn't want to risk changing that. Harry turned to Sirius. Waiting to get our hands on that diary was why I didn't do anything to get you out of Azkaban sooner. I knew you were suffering in there, but I left you there. I'm sorry. Sirius looked at him, and Harry couldn't read his expression. He was terrified that Sirius would reject him for leaving him in that hell for over a year. His godfather stood up and walked over to Harry, and he thought the man was going to hit him. He decided that if Sirius was going to hit him, he was going to stand there and take it. Maybe if Sirius could get it out of his system, then the rest of the fallout wouldn't be too bad, and Sirius wouldn't kick him out. However, Sirius pulled Harry into a hug, pressing Harry's head against his chest, and said, "It's okay, Harry. I forgive you. You did the right thing." Harry couldn't help but become a little emotional at that, and hugged his godfather back with a hug that would make Hermione proud. There was a bit too much emotion for them to continue the conversation for a while. Creature came in with a tray of tea and little cakes. Dumbledore poured himself a cup of tea, and Hermione poured one each for Harry and Sirius, as well as herself, having spent more than enough time in Grimmauld Place to know how Sirius liked his tea. It took them a while to get back to their conversation, but when they did, Harry and Hermione explained what they had done to prevent Voldemort coming back this time. Sirius was enraged when he heard that Lestrange was possessed, possibly willingly, by a Horcrux. When Harry told him about his assessment of why Lestrange would attack Narcissa Malfoy the way she had while looking for the diary, Sirius agreed with Harry's assessment that Bellamort, as he dubbed her, would come here looking for the locket. Sirius, however, quickly came up with a plan that Harry liked. He would put the house under the Fidelius charm. Dumbledore volunteered to be the secret keeper, but Harry instantly vetoed that idea. "No way, I won't let you be the secret keeper." "Why ever not?" Dumbledore asked, sounding genuinely confused. "Because neither of us trust you anywhere near enough to put that much faith in you," Hermione answered, indicating herself and Harry. "I'll be the secret keeper," Harry decided. "I'm afraid that won't work." As strong as a Fidelius charm is, it's also brittle if the secret keeper is too close to the secret. It will degrade the charm. In fact, a secret keeper will degrade all secrets they are too close to. In the case of a house, while it would take a few days of constantly being here, the charm needs twice as long without a secret keeper inside it to repair the damage. "As you live here, then you cannot be the secret keeper," Dumbledore explained. "Then I'll do it," Hermione exclaimed. "Harry can spend more time visiting me than I do him." Dumbledore didn't like that and said as much, but Harry backed Hermione as the secret keeper, and Sirius sided with Harry. So in the end, the headmaster could do nothing but agree. Dumbledore did agree to cast the charm, which was a plus. Sirius was sure he could work it out, but Dumbledore was already proficient with the spell. Apparently the spell needed the secret to be written down on a parchment that was prepared with a potion first, so they couldn't do the spell right then. But Dumbledore agreed to give Hermione the recipe so she could brew it. It would take a few days for Hermione to get the ingredients and brew the potion, so Sirius agreed to move out for the week just in case Bellatrix Lestrange turned up before they were ready. Fawkes was kind enough to give Harry, Hermione, and Dumbledore a quick ride back to the castle. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry and Hermione didn't know where Sirius spent his week away from Grimmauld Place. He wasn't going to tell them, and he had no idea how they would react if they knew. However, Sirius found his week sofa crashing at the Grangers' house quite comfortable. The conversation they had after dinner the first night, however, was never going to be a fun talk. The three of them were relaxing in the living room when Sirius decided to broach the topic. "So I found out what the kids were hiding from us." That, of course, got the Grangers' attention immediately. "What's going on, then?" Emma half asked and half demanded in a way only a mother could. Sirius proceeded to tell them everything he had learned from Harry and Hermione earlier that day about having their souls sent back from the future. There was a lot of upset talk from the Grangers as they were told everything that their daughter had been through. Or at least everything that Sirius had been told about. There was no doubt in any of their minds that there was plenty they hadn't told Sirius about, if for no other reason than they were condensing 6.5 years into a conversation that was only a couple of hours long. But after Emma had gotten out a bottle of bourbon, her drink of choice, and poured a not-so-healthy measure for each of them, they started to calm down. It was a comment from Dan that broke the stiffness, however. Well, at least we know how she made friends with Harry so quickly now. True, I remember that day. Emma's mood dropped as she spoke. I was terrified. Hermione and I were sitting in the kitchen. We had just finished having some mother-daughter talk before she went off to boarding school when she suddenly just burst into flames and was gone. I was distraught, of course. I thought my little girl had died. I almost didn't answer the phone when it rang, but I thought it might have been Dan, and I could not tell him. I was so relieved when it was Hermione on the phone saying she had just been teleported across London and that she was completely fine. I rushed out of the house, and to her as fast as I could. But by the time I got to Diagon Alley and Harry showed me into a hidden pub, the two of them were already the best of friends. I thought at the time that Harry must be the type who made friends easily, because Hermione had always had trouble with that, and also he was going to the same school Hermione was and had been raised in the regular world, so they would understand each other. Getting my baby back and having her find a friend was enough for me to not question how quickly they became best friends. The three of them spent the rest of the evening talking and trying to decide what they were going to do going forward. By the end of the night, the only thing they could really agree on was that, from the descriptions that the two had given Sirius, things were definitely a lot better this time than they were last time. At least the two of them seemed to know what they were doing. The next week passed without incident. Not only was Grimmauld Place not attacked, no one else was either. In fact, there were no sightings of Lestrange in the country at all, according to Dumbledore, who in his position as Chief Warlock had asked the DMLE to keep him in the loop. This unnerved Harry and Hermione. Unlike some others, they weren't naive enough to hope that Lestrange had accidentally killed herself. No, it was their belief that Lestrange had to be doing or plotting something. When Saturday came around, they went to Grimmauld again, and Dumbledore cast the Fidelius charm with Hermione as the secret keeper. It was weird, because the secret was worded to hide the property, and not that Harry and Sirius lived there, because a Fidelius charm would fail if the secret was no longer true. This meant that Harry was briefly inside a Fidelius that he wasn't told about. He couldn't focus on anything other than the other people in the room with him and the way out, and he was also compelled to get up and leave the property as soon as possible. He also couldn't remember anything about where he was. It was weird. He knew that as soon as he walked out the front door, he would know what city he was in, but right now the house he was in could be anywhere, in any country on the planet. In fact, he wasn't entirely sure that the house he was in wasn't located on the moon. Could wizards do that? A few words from Hermione whispered in Harry's ear were enough, and suddenly Harry knew exactly where he was. He watched as she told Sirius, and saw the moment Sirius's memories returned to him. Dumbledore expected Hermione to tell him next, but she refused until Sirius asked her to, proving in Harry's mind that she was the right one for the job. The rest of the term in school was practically incident-free, except for when they found out that Snape was marking down Susan Payne's potion work unfairly. Harry took this as a direct attack on her scholarship, so he had Professor McGonagall, as the one in charge of the scholarship, call a meeting between herself, Susan, Harry as the funder, Hermione as Susan's tutor, Sirius as Harry's guardian, Professor Sprout as Susan's head of house. They were all seated around in the deputy head's office, which was the only office in the castle, except for Dumbledore's, that was big enough for them to all sit comfortably in. Okay, enough of the mystery, Minerva. What's with this meeting? Professor Sprout asked once they were all sitting comfortably. Professor McGonagall nodded to Harry so that he would answer. Because, Professor, we believe that Snape is deliberately tanking Miss Payne's grades in an attempt to tank her scholarship. Susan just sat there looking at her feet, too nervous to say anything. Harry's statement shocked Professor Sprout. Why would he do that? Because Snape hates Harry and regularly drops his grade, and because Harry is the one paying for Miss Payne's scholarship that animosity seems to have spread to her, Hermione answered the professor. Harry picked up the thread. I honestly didn't care much while he was doing it to me. I know that my grades are higher than Snape claims, and it's only the outside OWLS and NEWTS that matter after school, so his pettiness had no real effect on me. Suzanne, however, needs to maintain and exceeds expectations average to continue her scholarship. If he is vindictive enough to give her a dreadful grade, it could destroy an otherwise brilliant average. Professor Sprout was looking angry now, but asked an important question. Professor Snape has been a teacher here at this school for a long time, and in that time I have seen him produce some very talented potioneers. How are you so sure that your grade, Mr. Potter, and Miss Payne's grades are being lowered? Maybe the two of you are just bad at potions. She didn't sound like she believed it, but she had to ask anyway. I'm the reason, Professor, Hermione spoke up. Harry studies his potions with me, and we both tutor Susan. While Harry doesn't find potions easy, his theory work I would say averages and exceeds expectations, and his practical skills about the same, maybe an outstanding on a good day. Yet Snape rarely marks him higher than poor. Susan doesn't have the same trouble Harry has with potions, and as Harry and I tutor her, we have seen her homework before she hands it in. Plus, before going to Professor McGonagall, I tested her brewing as well, looking for where she was going wrong so I could help her. Hermione added the last sentence as an afterthought, not wanting the professors to think she was looking to cause trouble. Professor Sprout looked angrier than Harry had ever seen her. One of the side effects of dealing with all of the big school problems before they could be blamed on Harry this time was that Harry didn't have the reputation of being a trouble magnet among the teachers that he had last time. This time they both had the reputation of being quiet and quite studious, although after the events around the Triwizard Tournament, Harry also had earned the reputation of being dangerous when he needed to be. So Professor Sprout believed Harry and Hermione were at least telling her the truth as they knew it. They talked for a while about what they were going to do. Harry made a change to the scholarship that no grade given by Snape was to be used in calculating Susan's scholarship eligibility unless that mark was verified by either Professor McGonagall or Sprout. Professor McGonagall agreed to that change and Sirius signed off on it as Harry's guardian. The two teachers were also going to test Miss Payne's potions abilities themselves. While neither of them were in the same league as Snape when it came to potions, Susan was only a first year, and they were more than skilled enough to test a first year themselves. If Susan's tests revealed that her marks were being manipulated, however, then the two witches who represented two of the Hogwarts heads of house, as well as the deputy head, were going to inspect Snape classes. Harry, who was confident that Susan's test would lead to the grease spill that the students had as potions professor being looked into, offered the two professors the use of his invisibility cloak so that they could observe how Snape behaves in class when he thinks no one can see him. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF over the Easter holidays. Harry reflected back on the last few weeks. Susan had aced her potions tests, and both Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout had heaped praise on the girl. Both the professors had also pulled Harry and Hermione aside, and had told them the results as well as praising them for the work they had done in tutoring the girl. It was only one evening a week, but it was enough that the girl was one of the best students in her year. The heads of house did borrow Harry's cloak. Professor Flitwick had joined them at this point, and their return of it 2 weeks later coincided with a very unhappy Professor Snape. Harry asked Professor McGonagall what the results of looking into Snape were, but she refused to answer any questions regarding that because it would be unprofessional. However, Harry did notice that she never once referred to Snape as Professor Snape, as she normally did when talking to a student. He found out the results were obvious, however, when Snape actually gave Harry an exceeds expectations on the next bit of homework Harry handed in. One night during the holiday, Harry and Hermione decided that they were going to break the rules about curfew that were already pretty lax because of the lack of classes. Once they finished their prefect rounds, instead of going back to their common room, the two of them decided that the prefect's bathroom was a better idea. They spent the evening skinny dipping in a pool that was so full of bubbles that they may as well have been fully clothed most of the time. When they got out, it was past midnight, and they used magic to dry off and get dressed. Harry got out the Marauder's map and had a look to see if anyone was leaking around the castle who could catch him out of bed. The last thing they wanted to end their night was to be dragged to an irate Professor McGonagall who would berate them for being out so late. Filch was out and about as usual, but he wasn't the only one moving on the map. Moving away from the Whomping Willow in the secret passage into the school was Bellatrix Lestrange. Chapter 27. Chapter text Chapter 27. When they got out it was past midnight, and they used magic to dry off and get dressed. Harry got out the Marauder's map and had a look to see if anyone was leaking around the castle who could catch him out of bed. The last thing they wanted to end their night was to be dragged to an irate Professor McGonagall who would berate them for being out so late. Filch was out and about as usual, but he wasn't the only one moving on the map. Moving away from the Whomping Willow in the secret passage into the school was Bellatrix Lestrange. Harry showed the map to Hermione, who understood what she was seeing immediately. They must be here looking for the diadem. I didn't think that they would try until the summer break when there were no students and less staff to catch them and get in their way. Apparently Easter break is empty enough, or maybe Voldemort is desperate. If he has checked on his other Horcruxes already, he may be panicking. Harry started to walk back and forth while staring at the map for almost a minute before he turned back to Hermione. I want you to go get Dumbledore. I will go after Lestrange. She's heading for the room of requirement. Hermione cut Harry off before he could finish. No, I'm going with you. You can't. Harry tried, but she cut him off again. I bloody can and I bloody will. I'm not leaving you to fight that monster on your own. Hermione was determined. But someone needs to go get Dumbledore. Honestly, Harry would prefer to send Hermione further away from danger, but he knew she wouldn't give up on being a part of this fight. His only hope was that he could give her another job that she would agree to do. Hermione dashed his hopes with a single word. Darby. The little elf popped into the room and looked at Harry and Hermione excitedly. What can Darby be doing for Mr. Harry Potter, boss man, and his granny? In an attempt to get the elf to address him more normally, Harry had told the elf that he couldn't call Harry master, because Harry was his employer, not his owner. But now Harry was called boss man by the sometimes maddening elf. Hermione took the map from Harry and handed it to Darby. Darby, we need you to go and tell Professor Dumbledore that Bellatrix Lestrange is in the castle. Harry and I are going after her, and we would appreciate some backup. Give him that map and tell him it shows the location of everyone in Hogwarts. Darby suddenly looked a lot more serious when he realized he was there, because they needed help with something serious, rather than a bit of help to seek back to their dorms after a rather late date. I is doing it right away. And with that, the little elf popped away to go rouse the headmaster. Hermione drew her wand and turned to Harry. Let's go. 1 second. Harry pulled out his invisibility cloak and put it on Hermione. Harry, I'm not going to hide while you do the fighting. I don't expect you to, love, but Voldemort and Lestrange would go straight for the kill if they see you. However, they will want to enjoy it if they catch me. I'm counting on you to use that opportunity to save my skinny ass. Harry explained his plan and was glad that Hermione accepted it. It wasn't enough protection as far as Harry was concerned, but he didn't have the time or knowledge to build Hermione a tank to hide in while she fought Lestrange from a few miles away. To be fair, if he could do this the way he wanted, he would also be in that tank miles away sitting next to her. They charged out of the bathroom, abandoning all thoughts of sneaking through the castle. If Filch caught them, then all the better. He could go get more teachers to punish them, and that would just be more people to help deal with Lestrange. Harry ran up the stairs 2 at a time, wanting to get to the room of requirement first. If he did, then he could set up the room to help him fight the possessed Death Eater. He used every secret passage and shortcut he knew, and when he got there, there was no door in the wall, proving that the room was still closed. Harry quickly started to pace back and forth, thinking of the room he wanted. I need the room where things are hidden. I need the room to help me fight. I need the room to help keep Hogwarts safe. The door appeared in the wall, and Harry wasted no time going inside. The room was just as he remembered it. Piles upon piles of random assorted items filled the cavernous space. Harry hid behind one of the piles where he could watch the door and started to wait. He felt Hermione settle next to him before he heard her say, How long do you think it's going to take her to get here? Not long, a few minutes, tops. The castle is pretty empty at this time, so she shouldn't have much trouble sneaking up here. Unless Dumbledore catches them first. If he can, I hope he does. If we can win this without getting involved in the fight, then all the better. Though I doubt it, the damn prophecy said he had to die at my hand. Or you at his. Please be careful, and don't make me mourn for the loss of my boyfriend tonight. Hermione's worry was easy to hear in what she said before she moved away from him to wait somewhere else. Despite what Harry had said, it took 25 minutes before the door opened, and it wasn't Lestrange who walked in first, or even Dumbledore. It was Snape. Lestrange walked in behind Snape, however, and although both of them had their wands out, it was clear that they weren't fighting each other. The door was already open. It shouldn't have been. Lestrange's voice was flat, even, and a little raspy, but then her voice shifted until it was disturbingly bubbly and energetic. Oh, maybe there is something for me to play with. Homenum revelio. Harry suddenly had a line of light pass right through the pile of junk and connect him to Lestrange's wand. Oh yay, I get to play. Come out, come out, come out. Heh. Lestrange practically sang, the excitement evident in her voice. Harry, who knew his position was compromised, knew he would lose nothing by answering. Oh, are you finally ready to play Bella? You and your friends threw that lovely party last year, then you didn't even bother to turn up. Still, I had a lot of fun. Harry was lying, of course. He hadn't had fun at all, but a Lestrange thinking straight was something he didn't want. And Snape finally finished with pretending to have a conscience. I see. What's the matter? Being a decent human too difficult for you? Snape's response was to cast a blasting curse at the pile of junk Harry was taking cover behind, but he had expected that, and already had a shield up protecting him from the shrapnel. Harry flicked his wand about and cast a pugno silently, and instantly bit of debris started to fly at Snape, also providing some cover for Harry to run and hide behind another pile of hidden junk. A green spell flashed past Harry as he ran, but he ignored it as it struck what looked to be an antique table that was ruined by a potion that had been spilt on it. Once Harry was safe, he peeked over the pile of hidden trash that was his current cover. Lestrange's face was one of fury, whereas Snape's face was covered in little cuts and blood. He apparently hadn't expected a counter-attack and had been struck by a few things before getting his shield up. Most of the blood was unfortunately from a forehead cut that still bled a lot despite being rather superficial. Harry shouted out from where he was, "You're going to have to do better than that. Didn't you hear I killed a Dark Lord last year?" He was really hoping Voldemort's spirit, or whatever he was sure was in Bellatrix, would rise to the bait, and he wasn't disappointed. Lestrange's voice went raspy again. "Oh, you think you killed me, do you, Potter? I am Lord Voldemort, the most powerful wizard to ever live, the finest a pureblood line has to offer. I am immortal, despite whatever temporary setbacks you may have been lucky enough to inflict on me, but I will always rise again." Harry couldn't help it, he laughed. "Oh, Tom, if only you knew how wrong you are. You, the most powerful wizard. You're barely a shadow, a little more than a ghost. If you even qualify as a wizard anymore, you are probably the weakest one alive. Pureblood. Your mother was practically a squib, and your father was as muggle as they come. You may be descended from the Slytherin line, but you barely even qualify as a half-blood." Harry marked. "And best of all, you think your Horcruxes make you immortal, but they are gone. Let's count them off, shall we? First, your diary. I stabbed it with a basilisk fang. Next, your locket. That one was destroyed by a house elf. I gave him the basilisk fang to do it with. Then was the one you put in the diadem and hid in this very room. Again, I stabbed it with, would you guess it, a basilisk fang. I gave one to Dumbledore to deal with the ring, and I cut up the snake in the graveyard before capturing the main soul part and feeding it to a Dementor along with Barty and Wormtail. Oh, Tom, the great and powerful wizard of the cup, you are the only piece left. Once I deal with your helper monkey, I will take you down to the Chamber of Secrets, and that will be it. No more Lord Voldemort." The megalomaniac appeared to not like Harry's answer, as he started to fire cures after curse towards him. Harry had been expecting this again, and had been slowly retreating further into the room as he spoke. As soon as he had more piles of random junk between him and the people who were now focusing on killing him, he started to run even deeper into the room. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Hermione was surprised when Snape walked through the door. Not that the greasy-haired git would help Lestrange or Voldemort. She wouldn't make that mistake again. No, what surprised her was that Snape knew that he was in the castle. Or did Lestrange and Voldemort seek out Snape? Was that why it took the possessed woman so long to get to the 7th floor? And where was Dumbledore? Surely he should have been here by now. She almost threw off the invisibility cloak when Lestrange cast the revealing spell, but noticed in time that for some reason the spell hadn't picked her up under the cloak. She didn't know why she hadn't been detected, but she wasn't going to throw away her advantage. Hermione listened to Harry as he wound up Voldemort. On one hand, she was proud of the accomplishments Harry mentioned. However, she could see how it was winding up Voldemort/Lestrange. And while that was obviously the point, she couldn't help but be terrified for Harry. When Snape fired a bombarder at the stack that Harry was hiding under, Hermione was only stopped from cursing Snape herself because she was distracted by Harry's counter-curse, sending the newly created shrapnel directly at Snape as he ran and hid behind another pile of junk. The killing curse that missed Harry by only centimeters had her heart pumping so hard that she was surprised that nobody could hear it. Harry taunted Voldemort again, and Hermione was hoping that Dumbledore would finally turn up. Spells were flying again, but Harry had already retreated deeper into the room. "We need to check on the diadem. It's possible that the boy is bluffing. They may still be looking for it, and he only guessed its location because we are here looking for it." The raspy voice indicated it was Voldemort talking from Lestrange's mouth. "Yes, Master, then we can do the ritual you showed me and truly bring about your rebirth." Lestrange's real voice this time was followed by a girly giggle. Snape didn't say anything. He just drew his wand and started to move towards Harry slowly and cautiously, but definitely going after him. Lestrange turned and started to walk into the room somewhere else, probably going to look for the diadem. Hermione was just trying to work out who to follow when the door to the room of requirement burst open again. Only this time it was a slightly out-of-breath Dumbledore who came striding into the room. Seeing the man, both Snape and Lestrange started to run, quickly going deeper into the cavernous room, each disappearing behind the massive piles of 1,000 years of Hogwarts detritus. Dumbledore charged after Lestrange, leaving Hermione to do her best to follow Snape. She ran into the maze at the same place Snape had, but she quickly lost him in the twists and turns. It became a large game of cat and mouse. Only the stakes were very real and very permanent. Also, nobody knew who was the cat and who was the mouse. Hermione didn't run. She was worried that she would bump into something and cause a noise that would tell everyone she was here and where she was. Right now, her biggest advantage was that no one knew she was here. She moved through the room as fast as she dared, keeping her eyes and ears open. Unfortunately, Hermione heard plenty, but saw little more than the flashes of spellfire lighting up the room from behind the mountains of hidden things. But what she heard was explosions and unforgivable curses. Hermione was terrified about what she would find. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry came across Snape first, and neither man held back. "Potter, I'm going to kill you for what you did to my godson." Sectum Sempra. Harry dove to the side and shot a bombarder not at Snape, but at the ground the man was standing on. Even if Snape shielded, the spell would still damage the floor and lose Snape his footing. If he tried to dive out of the way, then he would get hit by the blast, and the shrapnel, unfortunately Snape, seems to know that tactic, as he jumped back while shielding and rode the shockwave, landing on even ground completely unhurt. Curses started to flash back and forth between the two. At first, Snape underestimated Harry, having no clue about Harry being from the future and already having some real combat experience. Harry, however, remembered his fight with Snape after the man had killed Dumbledore and how Snape had made him look like a first-year who could barely point his wand in the right direction. Knowing that it was likely that Harry would have to fight Snape or someone just as skilled, Harry and Hermione had set aside a few hours every week they were in school to practice, and 5 years of training had made a big difference. Harry dodged and parried spell after spell and sent every jinx, hex, and curse he knew back at the dungeon bat. Snape was able to dodge and parry as well, but he didn't look anywhere near as confident now as he did at the start of the fight. Then Harry shot a Sectum Sempra curse at Snape, almost enjoying the fury on Snape's face at having his own spell used on him. Snape tried to dodge the spell, knowing full well that while it was possible to block that spell with a shield, it would take a powerful shield, and he couldn't risk using so much power and exhausting himself while fighting Harry. However, the bit of clear ground that he tried to step into suddenly wasn't clear, and as Snape shifted his weight, he felt his legs slip from under him and he fell. Harry, who was in a full kill-or-be-killed mindset, hit the man with an expelliarmus, causing his wand to fly away in a lever corpus, hoisting the man into the air by his leg. Then, finally, a sectum sempra, opening up the murderous Death Eater's neck. He knew that once he was out of here, he was going to have to face what he had just done. But for now, he pushed that part of his mind that was screaming to one side. He still had a Dark Lord to deal with. Harry started searching for Lestrange, cautiously making his way towards where he had found the Horcrux, thinking that if he was in Voldemort's position, he would want to confirm that the Horcrux was gone. Doubly so, given that Voldemort didn't know about the fragment of his soul in Harry's head. As far as Voldemort was concerned, without the diadem he truly was facing his morality. Suddenly, from somewhere in the distance there was shouting and flashes of spell fire. From the sound of the voices, it was Voldemort Lestrange and Dumbledore. Harry started trying to make his way to them, but the piles of hidden things weren't neatly organized, and it wasn't easy for Harry to find his way. If Harry could get there, maybe he could take Voldemort by surprise while he was distracted fighting Dumbledore. However, he didn't have enough time. There was a flash of green over the piles of junk in front of him, paired with a feminine call of Avada Kedavra. And then all the flashes and the sound of spells stopped. For a second, Harry hoped that Dumbledore had evaded the spell and stunned Lestrange, only for his hopes to be dashed at the sound of Lestrange's distinct laughter. It took 5 minutes for Harry to find a route in that led to the place Lestrange and Dumbledore had fought. But when he got there, Lestrange had already moved on, leaving Dumbledore's body laying there with his brightly colored robes at odds with the lack of twinkle in the man's eye. Harry still wasn't completely sure how he felt about Dumbledore. On one hand, the headmaster had been an obstacle getting in his and Hermione's way, and being so convinced that he was right that he saw only what he expected to see. But the man had definitely been on the right side, and there were times Harry even thought the man actually cared, at least a little. One thing Harry was sure of was that Dumbledore didn't deserve to die like this, in a pile of junk. Though if Harry understood the man even half as well as he thought he did, he was sure Dumbledore would be proud of dying while standing between his students and a threat. Harry kneeled down next to the man, and after removing his glasses, he pushed his eyes closed. Now it looked more like the man was asleep. "I'm sorry." Harry voiced the last words he would ever say to the old man and stood up. It was time he finished this. It wasn't difficult to see the way Lestrange had gone. She had kicked things from the piles as she walked past, leaving an easy trail to follow. Harry soon found the possessed woman who was currently raging at the pile of junk Harry had found the diadem in as she vanished item after item. He knew he probably should have just shot her in the back, but instead he couldn't resist saying something. "I already told you I destroyed it. The pieces of all your old junk are currently in the Chamber of Secrets if you really want to see them." Harry had expected more banter. His memories of Voldemort said that the man liked to gloat and brag. Instead, all that Harry got was Lestrange tuning to face him. One of her eyes was pitch black and shiny like the surface of a pot of ink. The other was grey and insane. Instead of conversation, the word that came out of her mouth was Crucio. Only the word wasn't spoken by one voice, but two that spoke in perfect union, each voice still coming from the mouth of Lestrange. Harry leaned to his right and away from the witch, and the curse shot over Harry's shoulder, passing through a space that was previously occupied by him. Harry shot a bone breaker back at her, but she deflected it. The two started to rapidly trade spells, and they weren't playing around. Bellatrix was firing some of the darkest known spells at Harry, one after the other, and 1 in 3 spells was an unforgivable. Harry couldn't claim the spells he was using were light either. The most innocent spell he used was an overcharged fire spell that he used to try and burn Lestrange to death. Nothing Harry tried was working, likely due to Voldemort possessing Lestrange. Along with all the disturbing things that went with that, it was still a magical body that was younger than 40. As such, she was more nimble than the last time Harry fought Voldemort, which meant that she was rather effective at dodging any curses Harry used. That's why he had tried the fire. It was much wider than a curse, and Harry didn't think she would be able to dodge it. The problem with fire is that it's bright and you can't see through it. So Harry didn't see the spell that Lestrange shot through the fire until it was right in front of him, and he didn't have any opportunity to block or dodge it. The red spell hit Harry right in the chest, and he was suddenly in too much pain to do anything but scream. As suddenly as the pain started, it stopped, and as Harry tried to recover, he heard the raspy voice of Voldemort cast, Expelliarmus, and Harry felt his wand shoot out of his hand as he was thrown into one of the room's uncounted piles of hidden things. Lestrange came strutting up to him, every move exaggerated into a gloat of victory. Oh, this is going to be fun. Lestrange's giggly voice was back. Crucio, Harry's world was again nothing but pain. She kept him under the curse, and there was nothing he could do but scream. Then she let up only to taunt him. I'm going to destroy your mind, and then I'm going to get really creative. I wonder how many Eichel students I can traumatize for life by mutilating your still-living body and leaving it on display in the Great Hall. Oh, I know. I'll make you invisible for a while so that you'll reappear right in the middle of breakfast. That should put them off their food for a while and send all the filthy little mudbloods running back to live in the dirt where they belong. Just as Lestrange was finishing her demented little speech, Harry saw something behind her, and it took everything he had not to smile. Hermione threw off Harry's invisibility cloak and pointed her wand right at the back of Bellatrix's head. She must have sensed the movement behind her and started to turn, only for Hermione to shoot off a piercing hex. It bored a hole straight into the back of Lestrange's head and out the front. Harry suddenly found himself splattered in blood, lumpy bits of grey stuff, and a few small shards of bone. The body of Lestrange fell aside, revealing Hermione riding a broom, her wand still pointing at where Lestrange's head had been as she shouted, "Get away from him, you bitch." Chapter 28. Chapter text, Chapter 28. Harry sat there in shock. He was covered in what was left of the matter that had been Lestrange's brain, and he was staring up at Hermione, who had just killed the woman in the middle of torturing him. Hermione quickly ran out of the adrenaline that she had been running on to act as she had, and she sank to the ground and started to sob. Harry had just enough mind to pull his girlfriend to him and envelop her in his arms. Between sobs, she would say things like, "I had to stop her," and couldn't let her hurt you. But Harry couldn't focus enough to really understand what Hermione was saying, so he just held her as close to himself as he could. Neither of them could say just how long they sat there, with Harry and now also Hermione covered in things they didn't want to think about, and the body of Lestrange lying just at their feet. Eventually, they were interrupted by a screaming sound that came from the body. The teens turned and looked at the source of the sound, terrified of what Harry knew was to come next. Black smoke started to billow out of the hole that now made up the greater part of Lestrange's face, the instant that the cloud spilled forth into the room with them. Harry felt a pain like someone had taken a white-hot piece of wire and pressed it to his scar. The smoke formed a mostly human face, though it was twisted by hate and rage, and it continued to scream not in pain, but in a primal fury. It tried to get at the teens to possess them, to control them, to hurt them in any way it could, but the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, the Horcrux made to keep the soul shards safe and contained, still stuck to the hip of the dead body that had once been one of the most feared witches in all of Britain, did its job, and started to draw the soul shard back inside it. The piece of Voldemort fought it, trying to get at Harry and Hermione, but it was in vain. The pull of the Horcrux too much for it to resist, and soon everything was silent. After so much happening, the silence was overbearing, and the two just sat there looking at the cup. It was probably a handful of minutes later that Harry got up, though it could have been an hour or more for all the sense of time he had. He summoned a bag from the piles of lost students' belongings, and a book bag that was originally black but looked like someone had spilled bleach on it came flying over. Harry used a cutting charm to separate the cup from Lestrange's body. He wasn't particularly careful with his aim. The cup was unfortunately immune to cutting charms, and he didn't care about Lestrange's corpse enough not to hit it. He flouted the cup into the bag, careful that neither he nor Hermione touched it, then floated Lestrange's body before pulling Hermione to her feet. As Lestrange was floated through the room of requirement, a book slipped from her pocket and landed on the floor. Both Harry and Hermione were wary of the book and levitated it into the bag with the Horcrux. The two trudged through the room, too tired and in too much shock to really be feeling anything. Hermione let out a small sob when she saw the body of the headmaster, but Harry just floated it up next to Lestrange's. Snape was still hanging in the air over a pool of his own blood, so Harry added his body to the collection he had floating behind him and left the room of requirement, leading the way to the headmaster's office. On the way, he called on Darby and had the elf bring him the last basilisk fang he had stored in his trunk. The headmaster's office was full of noise when Harry stepped in, the bodies floating behind him. The portraits were arguing as a new portrait of Dumbledore was sleeping in his frame. It would likely take Portrait Dumbledore at least a few weeks to wake up. Seeing Harry walk into the office, a bunch of the former heads started to demand answers, but Harry ignored them. He knew the first thing he had to do was destroy the cup, and Darby soon popped in with that he needed. A few of the portraits protested what Harry was about to do when they saw Hufflepuff's cup, but he didn't have the energy to listen to them. He stabbed the Horcrux with the fang and felt oddly satisfied when he heard again the dying screams of a piece of Voldemort's soul. It was done. All the free parts of the soul were destroyed. Harry felt a wave of fatigue was over him at the thought that the fighting was over. A big part of him wanted to just leave the bodies in the office, and for him and Hermione to go find somewhere quiet so he could just sleep, but he knew he couldn't do that. First, he put the cup and the fang in the book bag and gave it to Darby, telling the elf to put it in his trunk. He knew that the fires in the school were a flue network of their own, and only the flues in the professor's offices were able to connect to the outside of the castle. Harry flew the DMLE from the office and reported that Lestrange had attacked the school and that she, Snape, and Dumbledore had died. After confirming that the danger had passed and the fighting was over, he was told that a team from the DMLE would be at the school shortly. Once Harry was done with the flu call, he sent a patronus message to Professor McGonagall telling her to come to the headmaster's office as soon as possible. That done, Harry collapsed in a chair with Hermione, not having the energy to stand anymore. Professor McGonagall soon came running into the office dressed for bed in her tartan dressing gown. "Potter, what's going on? And why are you summoning me to the headmaster's office at 3 in the morning? I have half a min." She then saw the 3 dead bodies and was shocked into silence. Director Amelia Bones of the DMLE herself soon came, leading a troop of Aurors. Harry had forgotten that, as the chief warlock, Dumbledore's death would require that the DMLE send the most senior people. It wasn't until the start of breakfast, 5 hours later, and going over their story about 10 times, that Harry and Hermione were taken to the hospital wing and left in the car of Madame Pomfrey, who shuffled them into beds and gave them each a dreamless sleep potion. In the aftermath of Lestrange's raid of Hogwarts, Harry and Hermione had a decision to make. Would they try and go back in time again and try for a better outcome? On one hand, they knew even more now than they did the last time, but on the other hand, compared to the first timeline, things were pretty good now, and trying again could easily lead to a worse outcome. They still didn't know where the cup was hidden before this, so they couldn't destroy all the Horcruxes before Voldemort attempted to come back, meaning there was always going to be an element of luck involved. What if Lestrange was the only one who knew where the cup was? If something happened to her, then they would be left with a bomb just waiting to go off. No, the current timeline was pretty good. No war, little chaos, and best of all, even if they hadn't been able to save everyone, they had saved a lot. Sirius, Mad-Eye, Cedric, Director Bones, Minister Fudge, Rufus Scrimgeour. The Muggleborns weren't going through hell on the run, and best of all, Hermione's parents still knew who they were and who their daughter was. This timeline was worth fighting for. They weren't guards to decide to erase the past 5 years of everyone's lives on a chance that they could make a world they thought was better. They had used a situation they had found themselves in once, but doing it on purpose just didn't feel right to either of them. It was time for them to look to the future, not the past. With Dumbledore dead, Hermione was no longer bound to the oath of doing her Horcrux research in his office. The oath required there to be a Dumbledore's office for that to apply, and that office now belonged to Headmistress McGonagall. So Hermione stole the books on Horcruxes again, and she also had the book that had fallen out of Lestrange's pocket. At first they had been worried that the book was a Horcrux like the diary had been, or that it was cursed like the ring had been. But after every test she and Harry could devise, the only things on the book were some quick and dirty privacy charms. Harry had gotten Hermione a trunk like the one Mad Eye had, one with a secure room that could only be opened by the two of them. The room was set up as a study so that she could do her research without risking that one of her doormates might pick up one of the incredibly dark and dangerous books out of curiosity at what Hermione was studying. The trunk had been expensive, but it was better to be excessively cautious with books that contained instructions for such dark magic. Apparently, while on the run, Lestrange/Voldemort hadn't had the time or materials to enchant her book with real security. This meant that, while it took some time to beat the charms, it wasn't particularly difficult. It turned out the book was Voldemort's work journal. In it were the plans he had worked out step by step to restore himself to a full body. After his plans at the graveyard had failed, the younger version of Voldemort had another way to return, though this last method was nowhere near as fast. He had needed to pass his two Death Eaters, one of each sex, and have them conserve a child in a ritual circle. The two soul fragments would be drawn into the fetus, where they would bond with the proto-soul of the fetus. 9 months later, a brand new baby Voldemort would have been born, a baby Voldemort with a whole and complete soul. It was a disgusting piece of magic, but it did prove one thing to Hermione, that it was possible to transfer a soul shard out of its Horcrux. That information gave Hermione the hope she needed, and she started the long process of breaking down the ritual to find how to do the parts she needed. Harry and Hermione finished out their 5th year taking their OWLS, loving that exams were the biggest thing they had to worry about. Hermione's research into the Horcrux in Harry's head, while important, wasn't time critical. The last couple of weeks after the OWLS were mostly spent just soaking up the sun around the lake, sometimes alone and sometimes with their friends. Harry had a good laugh at one point when Carlin and Luna had joined the two of them for a picnic around the far side of the lake, and the younger boy hadn't realized he was on a double date until they were about halfway through. Luna and Carlin were getting pretty serious, and Carlin had even been invited to go snorkack hunting with the Lovegoods over the summer holidays. Luna admitted that she was still unsure if her father had heard the part about Carlin being her boyfriend and had just accepted because Carlin was a skilled photographer. Soon the end of the year came, and all the students piled into the Hogwarts Express to travel south to London. Harry still half expected Malfoy to come bursting into his compartment, but from what he heard, Draco had been betrothed to a pureblood girl, whose father had taken control of the Malfoy businesses as part of the deal. The part that had really amused the Weasley twins, from whom Harry had heard the information, was that as part of the deal Draco had to attend a non-magical school, and the grades he got there would determine how big the stipend he and his future wife received from the Malfoy business would be. Harry thought it was perfect. Dan, Emma, and Sirius were waiting for the two of them on the platform, and instead of taking them home, they took them out to dinner. Not just a walk-in place either, Sirius had a reservation for a private room. Hermione asked what was going on once they were seated, and it was a grinning Sirius who told them that the Wisengamot had decided to offer both Harry and Hermione the Order of Merlin for their role in protecting the students of Hogwarts from Bellatrix Lestrange, and for Harry's actions in capturing 3 incredibly dangerous criminals at the end of the Triwizard Tournament. Both of them almost turned them down out of humility, as well as the fact that Lestrange wasn't interested in the students when she and Voldemort had snuck into the school. However, there was one thing that came with the Order of Merlin that pushed them to keep it. It also came with a lifelong seat on the Wisengamot. Hermione had put her aspirations to help the House Elves to one side while she worked on Voldemort and the Horcruxes, but Wisengamot's seats would make that goal a hell of a lot easier to achieve, so they accepted the award. The award ceremony had been a big summer ball in the Ministry. The entire Wisengamot was there, and the whole thing was an excuse for each of them to talk to the new Order of Merlin holders and feel out just how they were likely to vote in the future. For a lot of the issues, Harry could honestly say he had no idea and would have to study the issues a lot more. However, he was happy to say he would vote for any bill that gave werewolves back all the rights they lost because of their curse, and that he would oppose any bill that restricted the rights of any magical citizen. One thing Harry truly wasn't looking forward to was going to visit his cousin. He and Hermione took the night bus to a small town out in the countryside of Surrey, and after talking with a few locals, Harry was able to find Aunt Marge's house. According to the Dursleys' will, Harry had gotten a copy from the probate office. The house on Privet Drive was to be held for Dudley until he was 18 and rented out to a good family until then to pay the property tax and mortgage. Harry knocked on the door of the house and winced slightly as the sound of about 10 dogs barking assaulted his ears. "Get the door." Harry heard his aunt shout, and a short wait later, where Harry could hear someone struggling with a pack of dogs, the door opened to reveal Dudley. His cousin saw Harry standing there with Hermione, and for a moment it seemed like he was trying to get angry at Harry, only he couldn't seem to do it. Almost defeatedly, he asked, "What's happened now?" Harry saw the change in Dudley, so he didn't waste any time in saying that the monster that killed his parents was dead, and that while he had tried to do it, it was Hermione who had finished off Lestrange. Dudley actually surprised Harry by shaking Hermione's hand and thanking her. They ended up going for a walk around the local neighborhood, and Dudley apologized for hitting Harry the last time he had seen him. He told them that in his temper he had mouthed off that his parents' deaths were all Harry's fault, and a few of his dorm mates had called him out on the complete bullshit he had been spouting. They had, aggressively at times, made him think over everything. In the end, Dudley couldn't tell his dorm mates the truth because they would think him insane. He did, however, realize that after the way Harry was treated, he hadn't owed his family anything, and Harry, being a teenager himself, couldn't be held responsible for what some murderer did. As they talked, Dudley revealed that he had done quite well in his GCSEs, but with his parents' estate held in trust for him until he was 18, he didn't have the money to return to Smeltings for his A-levels, and Marge apparently didn't have the money either. Harry told Dudley about how he had agreed to pay for the last 2 years if Dudley needed it, and was surprised when Dudley tried to refuse, but Harry insisted, saying that the school had apparently been good for Dudley. Harry and Hermione left a much less mopey Dudley behind them when they left. Harry doubted that they would ever have a good relationship between them, but all that time away from his parents had let Dudley grow up into something that resembled a decent human. Harry's birthday came and went, and with it came his and Hermione's OWL results. Hermione had managed to fix her one bad grade in defense against the dark arts, and she now had outstandings in all of her subjects. Harry hadn't done nearly as well as Hermione, as he only had 5 outstandings in defense, transfiguration, charms, care of magical creatures, and potions, with an exceeds expectations in everything else. Sirius was more than happy with the results as soon as he read them, and the Grangers, once they understood that their daughter had just achieved the magical equivalent of straight A's in her GCSEs, were ecstatic for their daughter. With the problem of Voldemort/Lestrange dealt with, and the adults in their lives happy with their OWL results, on top of no homework, as they hadn't chosen what NEWTS yet, Harry and Hermione basically had the summer to themselves to do whatever they wanted. With the night bus to get around the country cheaply and beaches being free to visit, the two of them spent a lot of time relaxing on the sand, with Hermione catching up on reading a few novels, and Harry goofing off in the sand or getting involved with some game other teens on the beach were playing. After everything that had happened, it was just what they needed, a slice of the normal life they had been fighting for. It wasn't until Harry and Hermione were in their 7th year, and Hermione was head girl, that Hermione finally made the breakthrough to get the soul shard out of Harry. As was often the case, the solution turned out to be much simpler than they ever would have guessed. Harry had to make a Horcrux. Naturally, Harry had not been a fan of the idea when Hermione first told him. After a week-long fight where Harry had been an ass and refused to listen to Hermione at all, she had tied him to a chair in the room of requirement. After silencing him so that he had to listen, she explained, "God damn it, Harry, you are an infuriating git sometimes. Now you're just going to sit there and listen to me for a bit." Harry shot her a look, but that was all he could do. "I don't mean for you to murder someone and use that murder to split your soul. I'm talking about using the final part of the ritual where you push the fragment into an object. Only instead of a fragment of your soul, we target the fragment that is already separate from your soul. put Voldemort's soul in something worthless, like a copy of one of Lockhart's books, then we destroy it and end the problem for good. Harry had calmed down when he understood that he wasn't going to kill anyone or any of the more distasteful parts of the ritual, and had agreed to Hermione's plan, then spent the next few weeks apologizing to her for hurting her feelings. Hermione had to rewrite the ritual from the ground up to remove the elements that they didn't need. While they weren't completely happy with the results, as they couldn't remove the need for a sacrifice completely, Hermione was able to work it so that the sacrifice of her virginity to Harry was acceptable, even if she had wanted their first time to be more romantic. The ritual went off without any problems, and for hopefully the last time in his life, Harry wielded a basilisk fang and destroyed the Horcrux. Once the last Horcrux was destroyed, Fawkes had made an appearance and started to sing a song of relief, joy, and apology. Harry and Hermione both understood the bird felt ashamed of what the feather he had donated for Voldemort's wand had done, and he had added magic to Harry's wand so that Harry could end the damage being done by Voldemort and his wand. Fawkes took Harry's wand from him and burst into flames just like on his burning day. Both the phoenix and the wand were reborn in the ashes, and the holly in the wand took on a much lighter color. Harry understood that the wand would never take him back in time again. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry proposed to Hermione on his 18th birthday, and she was more than happy to say yes. They both agreed to wait until after they had gotten their masteries to get married, and so it wasn't until Harry was 22 and had his defense mastery that he got to see a beaming Hermione in her wedding dress. Despite being members of the Wisengamot, they opted for a Muggle ceremony in the same church that Hermione got christened in. It was a great excuse to keep the wedding from getting out of hand, with half the wizarding world trying to gate crash the wedding. Carlin was there both as a guest and as a professional photographer. He mainly worked with Luna taking photos for the Quibbler, but it wasn't uncommon for his work to end up in other publications. It took Hermione and Harry 12 years of work to pass a law to help house elves. Unfortunately, the law wasn't one to free the elves, but an animal welfare law that protected all the magical creatures owned by witches and wizards, mandating a minimum standard of care where violators would have all the magical creatures they owned taken away from them. It wasn't what they wanted, and the pressure for the public was more about protecting cute pets like Krups and Kneazles. But as Harry told Hermione, it was a massive step in the right direction, and it wasn't like they needed to stop making things better. Harry and Hermione had 4 kids. They had meant to stop at 3, but Hermione's last pregnancy had resulted in twins. Harmony Rose was the oldest. William Henry was next, followed by the twins Charles Sirius and Portia Lily, who was the youngest, but Harry and Hermione refused to let the twins know who was older. Harry and Hermione were surprised when all of their kids could speak Parseltongue, but after some paranoid testing, the best they could figure was that Harry had absorbed the Slytherin line gift and had passed it on to his children just like any other line gift. All of them were raised in both the magical and the Muggle world, so they were just as comfortable in both. Despite getting her mastery in Transfiguration, Hermione became an author, specializing in writing books that bridged the gap between the mundane world and the magical. 2 of her books were even added to the Hogwarts book list. Hermione's books were never quite as popular as Lockhart's had been at his height, but when the man tried to discredit her books, in an act of sheer pettiness, Hermione had stood by her work and opened them up to public scrutiny. The public inspection of the papers just boosted sales of her books even higher when no errors, save a few missing commas, were found in her books. Harry had his mastery in defense against the dark arts and went through a few jobs before he found where he fit. When Moony retired from teaching at Hogwarts, and Harry took on the role of defense professor. Harry, as he had learned in the DA, was a natural teacher, and he soon became one of the school's most popular teachers. Life was never perfect. There were times when he and Hermione had fights, and times they both fought with their kids, but they were a real family, and Harry wouldn't change that for the world.